This is Mark Guerrero. Welcome to East L.A. Music Stories, episode 21. My guest is my longtime friend, longtime drummer, Ernie Hernandez. We were together in many bands from the 60s into the early 70s, Mark and the Escorts, The Men from Sound, 1984, named after the George Orwell book, the Mud Brothers, and Tango. So for about 11 years, we played together we split up for about a year and a half, around 1970 into 71, but pretty much 10 years straight playing, and from the very beginning. How you doing, Ernie?
I'm doing good, Marcus.
That's good, man. You're up in Eureka in the frozen north, Eureka, California.
It's not frozen, but it's colder. Yeah, up here in the northern coast. But everybody asks me, "Oh, does it snow up there?" No, it doesn't snow. It gets frosty and icy, but since I'm only a couple of miles from the actual ocean, there's no snow up here.
No. But I was up there last summer visiting you, and it was a bit cold, especially when we went out to the beach and at night, you know.
Yeah, you learn how to dress in layers.
Yeah, there you go.
That's the thing, you know.
So we met well, actually, I don't even know if we met. I was first aware of you in the third grade at Humphreys Avenue School in East Los Angeles. I happened to have just gotten into the school band in the third grade. Back there in those days, you could actually learn to play an instrument in school. And I took up clarinet, I must admit. And you were in there as the percussionist. And amazingly, our future bass player, Rick Rosas, was in the band on trumpet. Little did we know we'd be playing together for 10 years after that. I mean, once we got older. Yeah. But my first impression of you was you were riding on one of those audio visual carts, you know, where you might put a projector on. You were riding it like a skateboard. And I go, who is this hyper kid?
Yeah.
But you were a little on the ADD side, right?
Well, that was the whole thing. I was a hyperactive kid, and so they called my mom and they said, you know, we can't get your kid to settle down, and so then I guess between her and the teacher, they figured out, well, maybe we can have him do some extra activity that will kind of calm him down a little bit. And they said, well, maybe we could get him to play the drums and put him in the orchestra. So they got together with the orchestra teacher at Humphreys Avenue School that we went to, and she agreed. And one of the things that I just found out you didn't know, that one of the stipulations was I had to take drum lessons. So we had the Story Music store on Whittier Boulevard, and it was just like 2 blocks away from where I lived on McDonald. And I would go to drum lessons there, and my dad bought me a snare drum in 1958. I was 8 years old.
Wow.
And I started playing the snare drum, and I was always liking music because my parents were avid music lovers. My dad followed all the swing bands and had all the albums and records, and actually used to go to downtown to see the swing bands play. I remember he was all excited. He got to see Gene Krupa. And anyway, then from Humphreys Avenue School, we were neighbors, but we just played as neighborhood kids. And I remember after I got to know you as a neighbor, I did notice that you were in the orchestra, but you know, it's funny, back then we didn't really communicate that much.
No, I didn't really know you at that point, but it's important you brought up the neighbor thing, but that's a major thing. we didn't know that we lived 3 doors apart. You know, you were like 3 doors up the street
Right.
on McDonald Avenue, and we did become friends early. Like we were like 8 or 9, and I used to go over to your house and we played basketball. And remember that famous picture of me in your backyard with Melvin Thompson, all our neighbors, all these little kids. We looked like the little rascals, about 8, 9 years
Exactly.
old. There's that picture of us, little kids. Yeah. So it goes way back. We started knowing each other. But the bottom line is you started to become a drummer. And at what point did your dad get you the drum set, the Slingerland?
Well, there's a whole story behind that too, because uh my mom was into art, and that was one of her majors in high school. She went to El Monte High School, and so she was always doing art stuff at the house. That was her hobby. And right next to the art supply store was Cronin's music store on Beverly Boulevard. And I'd sneak in there whenever she, go to the art supply store. And there was a gold drum, sparkle drum set that was, they put it right as you walked in, and it caught my eye. And I fell in love with this gold drum set. And since I had already been playing drums, I figured, well, maybe I could talk my mom into coming. So I dragged her over, and Jim Cronin, being the businessman that he was, told my mom, "Oh yeah, this is a great set. He would grow into it, because the bass drum was almost as big as I was." But anyway, that's how we got that first drum set.
Wow. So let's fast forward a little bit. So one day I was about 12 or 13, probably just turned 13. And I was playing with my friends in the yard. I don't know if we were playing tag or hide and go seek or something. But I remember I was up on the roof of my house. Maybe I was trying to hide or something.
Well, you had that big apricot tree next to the roof of your house that you would have build tree houses up there.
Yeah, I had a 3 or 4 story tree house that I built myself. It was with an observation tower with chicken wire on it, chicken coop wire. But anyway,
luckily we never fell off.
Yeah, luckily it didn't fall apart. It wasn't up to code. But anyway, you came over and you said, "Hey, why don't you get your guitar and amp?" Because I had just gotten my first electric guitar. A few months before that, my dad had got me a little Tijuana $8 guitar, a little requinto, that I had started learning on. And then eventually he got me this little Gibson amp and a little Melody Maker 1 pickup guitar. So you knew I had that. And you said, "Hey, bring your amp and guitar over, and a friend of mine's over here." And I remember being reluctant. I was going, "Oh God, I'm playing." And so I just kind of reluctantly jumped off the roof and got my stuff and went over. And there you were with Robert Warren, who also played guitar. And you had met him at the Cleland house.
Right.
And your mom had told you should go and try to get some social life over there, or whatever it was. How'd that happen?
Well, after I got the drum set, and it wasn't easy, because my dad was 100% against me being a drummer with a drum set. He was okay with the orchestra, but then he just thought all the terrible things that a musician could turn into, and he didn't want that for his son. So it took a while for my mom to finally convince him that it would be good for me if I got the drums. And one of the things that we kind of passed over is that when I was younger, there was an incident that happened, and I ended up getting a speech impediment, and it was very hard for me to communicate with people, because I could only say a couple of words, and I'd stutter, and then I'd give up. And so that was one of the things that that was so good about music to me is that uh, as you know, we had the music teacher come around to our classrooms every
Yeah.
once a week,
Miss
and
Knight, Miss
and
Knight.
we and Mrs. Knight, yeah, and we would sing, and so while I was singing the songs, I didn't stutter, and it felt so great to be able to uh, just let myself go, and I knew that I wasn't going to be embarrassed by stuttering, like and so that was a big thing for me. I really loved the drums, and I loved music. The first time that we went on a field trip and they took us to see the Los Angeles Symphony Orchestra, and sitting there, and it was a mind-blowing experience. And so it was just the love of music that that was so great, and I'm just wishing that all the kids now could do the same thing, have music in school, because that's very important.
Yeah. You remember that country singer Mel Tillis? He had a speech impediment, but when he sang, it wasn't there.
Yeah, yeah. So it was funny because you guys actually talked me into um, singing. It wasn't something that I
Oh, really?
brought up.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go back to that first day. So I went over there, and the three of us just started jamming around, And at the time, what was the big craze was the surf music and the instrumentals.
Right.
Dick Dale was big, and Wipeout had just come out, which he used to play, and the Ventures, and that was what was happening, instrumentals. And so that's what we started to just jam on. And Green Onions by Booker T and the MG. It wasn't all surf, but it was mostly instrumentals. Last
Right.
Night.
Freddie King songs.
Yeah, that's right. So that's how we started, and that's how the band started, by accident. And the first gig we did was for your cousin, Mary Frances, and
Oh yeah,
and there's
a
pictures,
backyard barbecue gig.
and there's pictures on my website. If you go to my Mark and the Escorts page of markguerrero.com, you'll see the picture of the three of us sitting there like little 12, 13-year-olds
Yeah,
playing this party.
it's funny how back then you didn't stand and play, you sat down and played.
Because we didn't know any better. Not only that, not only were we sitting down, but we were sitting behind the amp instead of in front of the
Yeah.
amp. We didn't know shit from
Oh,
Shinola
boy.
at the time.
Yeah,
But anyway, we played, and it was cool, and we got paid, I think, $5.
yeah. And I have a picture of us back
No.
then.
Oh my God. Look at that. That's the truth. Hey, Robert's so much taller than us. I'm in the middle.
And that was at Laguna Park when we played there. That was
our second gig. So our
Yes.
second gig was Laguna Park, and a bunch of pretty big crowd. A lot of little girls, little 8-year-olds were digging us, and we looked 8 years old ourselves.
My dad was kind of like our manager at the time, and since he had worked with with one of the churches that he went to in El Monte, he knew how to get people's attention, and so he was able to get that gig for us at the park. They were having, it was some kind of a celebration. Okay. I don't know what it was, but he was the one that was actually getting our first gigs for us, and that was one of them. It was fun.
Yeah, so your dad, not only was he quote unquote kind of our manager, but he used to take us to the gigs because he was in construction.
Yeah,
and he had this cool truck, and he would.
He had a flatbed truck, and you guys named it the R.E. Job.
Well, that was in the company he worked for, right?
That was the company that he worked for, and we were able to put everything in there, and he was our roadie, and he was our manager, roadie,
and photographer,
and that was one of his hobbies, was being a photographer. And we were lucky enough that he always slung his camera around with him whenever he took us to a gig. And we just have all these beautiful pictures that he took of us performing.
Yeah.
And I mean, and not only that, he also supplied our first PA system, and then a little bit later, when I got into recording, he bought me a reel-to-reel recorder, which we ended up doing your first songs that you wrote.
I was gonna say, when you say didn't he? Was that the Standell PA you're talking about?
Well, he bought a Supro amp before that.
Okay. All right, let's put it this way. It was an actual, like a guitar amplifier that we used for vocals.
Right.
It was your amplifier.
And that was most of the bands used to do that. They
Oh,
just
yeah.
get an amplifier and put it out there, and that was their PA.
Absolutely. But the first official PA we got was a Standell, and we all pitched in for that.
Yeah, my dad purchased it, and then we ended up paying him.
Right. So yeah, your dad, because your dad took photos of us just about everywhere, we're probably the most documented band of the era, because we got hundreds of photos from all the gigs. It was just a blessing. Your dad was a great guy.
Yeah, and it was great because not only he just didn't take a picture of me, I mean, he took a picture of the whole band, because later on, down the road, I had people take pictures, but then they just take a picture of me, and it was kind of like he did the right thing and took a picture of the whole band.
Yeah, man. Yeah, what a blessing. So our third gig is worth mentioning because it was at the CYO Hall on Brooklyn Avenue, now Cesar Chavez. And it was November of 1963. It was like a week before the Kennedy assassination. And we were billed as the Twisting Escorts because the twist was the rage at the time.
Yeah, I guess that was the gig my uncle got us, right? From the American Legion.
I don't remember who got us a gig.
Yeah, my uncle was my uncle Larry Zamora. He was one of the head guys there at the American Legion in Boyle Heights, and so he ended up getting us that gig. And whoever the person that would put the flyers together, they're the ones that put that flyer together and put the swinging Escorts.
No, Twisting Escorts.
The Twisting Escorts.
Well, it's apparently your family was our booking agent at first.
Yeah, and my dad had the idea of getting a hold of different community centers. I remember we played in Claremont.
That's right.
He got us a few gigs in Claremont. And then us ourselves, I remember, I don't know if you were the one that got the Garfield gig, Sports Night.
Yeah, I got that
Sports Night gigs. And then
it was a biggie.
And then I ended up getting the Alhambra High School gigs.
Those Claremont gigs were big because up to then, the whole band would get paid, $10 to split up, 3 ways or whatever. But the Claremont gig was I think it was like $40. And then the next time we went back, it was $80. And I'm like, oh,
yes.
God. So the next major thing was we realized we needed a bass player. We were doing gigs, 2 guitars and drums,
Right.
And one of the reasons, and I've talked to a lot of musicians from East L.A. from the era, and pretty much everybody agrees that in 1963, there weren't a lot of kids that had bass guitars. You didn't see them. People had guitars, they had drums, saxes, but, there weren't a lot of kids with basses, electric basses. So Richard was my sort of elementary school friend. I got to know him better, like in the 5th and 6th grade, and we used to walk to church together once in a while or go to parties. And I just said to him, go to parties wearing trench coats.
The trench coats.
Yes.
You guys were cool with the trench coats.
I think one time I even had a little fedora,
Yeah, you did.
So I told Richard, I said, hey, get a bass. Ask your parents to get you a bass and you can get in the band, I didn't know how musical he was, although he did play trumpet before. But there's a little footnote that I didn't find out till 30, 40 years later. My childhood friend who lived behind your house and my house, he was on the street behind us, was Joseph Seipert.
Oh,
Joseph Seipert was a good friend of mine. And he reminded me when I saw him, God, 10 years ago, he said that I offered him the bass gig first.
Oh,
I told him, get a bass, you can get in the band. And so I started to try to teach him guitar, and he just couldn't do it. He was so frustrated. And he just said, I just can't do this. So then I offered it to Richard. So think about the fate, right? If Joseph had worked out, Richard may have never been a bass player, and he would have never maybe played with Neil Young. So that's how fate works, you know? So yeah, I had forgotten about that. So anyway, so Richard's parents, I knew that they were very middle class. You know, his dad had a good job, and they had a nice house on the other side of Humphreys Avenue School. And you know, they got him a nice St. George bass and bass amp. And he came over, and Robert and I sort of got him started. And we had a 4-piece. Now we had a bass player, and he picked up pretty quick. And then we started being the Escorts as a 4-piece. And gave us
but before that, the Escorts, just the three of us, we your dad took us into the recording studio, Jimmy Jones recording studio in Pasadena, and we did an acetate.
Okay. Now here's where my dad came in handy. You know, he used to record at this place in Pasadena called Jimmy Jones recorders, and just as a nice little fun thing, he took us in there. He probably paid for the session. I don't know how much it cost back. There wasn't very much, but you know, and we went in as a 3-piece, and we recorded an acetate. And I played lead on San Jose by Freddie King, and Robert played lead on the other side, which we called Blues. And it was just a blues instrumental.
It wasn't even the blues; it was just blues.
Yeah. So then when after we had, so that was exciting. We had an acetate. So once we had Richard, we went back in there, and we did another acetate. And this time, oh, you know what? Guess what? Let me correct myself. The first acetate, I played Windy and Warm.
Windy and Warm, yes.
By the Ventures. That was the first acetate we did with blues on the other side. The second one is when I did San Jose by Freddie King on lead, and Richard did, and Robert did the blues. I think the first one was
the blues. Now I got
was the blues. It was just another blues. But so we had 2 little acetates, and we got some early recording experience, which was very exciting.
Yes, and the other thing that your dad did for us back when we were the Escorts was we played on a Sunday morning television show.
Channel 13, KCO.
Channel 13. I remember we went in and we were able to see all the stuff for the Lloyd Thaxton show.
Right, the set for the Lloyd Thaxton show, which was a rock and roll show, a dance show that was very popular. Now, I must say that the show he got us on was a Spanish language show. You know, he didn't have any connections in the English language world in the business. But yeah, we went on some, you know, Spanish language show, and we went on there, and did we do Wipeout?
We probably did.
I think so. You had
with one of our hot tunes.
Yeah. So that
and then we also because of your father, we played at his nightclub.
Right.
Three of
Right. First time we did it was a 3-piece. On Sundays, he'd have a tardeada, you know, where he would start like at 4:00 in the afternoon, and be an earlier night than Friday and Saturday. And because it was early, he'd have like a floor show, or he might have a guest. So he brought us in, you know, I'm sure we were a novelty act as far as that place, because it was an adult nightclub, and here's these little 13-year-olds coming in and playing Wipeout in a Spanish language, you know, club that was playing Mexican music. And of course we went over well because we were kids.
Oh, they loved us.
Yeah. And we have pictures of that too. That's there on my website.
Right.
And then when Richard got in, we did it again with Richard.
Right.
And then when we got the band bigger, the 5-6 piece, we did it again. I think we did it
Right.
3 years in a row, and that was fun.
Yeah.
Now, we must have, since we're talking about my dad, we might as well talk about those little out of town gigs we did. So in '64, when we had Richard in the band, we were a 4-piece, and he took us up to Bakersfield to a gig at a what do you call it? Like the Pomona Fair, like fairgrounds. Yeah, probably the Bakersfield Fairgrounds or something.
Mhm.
And there were like hundreds, if not thousands. There was a lot of people, hundreds of people in the place. And the funny thing was, we played and we went over great. The little girls, little 8, 9, 10, 12-year-olds, they were really excited. But at the time, the Beatles had come out. And kind of, I don't know if it was as a joke or not, but we had Beatle wigs, really horrible Beatle wigs that made out of cloth or something.
It
And
looked like you put a black mop on top of your head.
yeah. And we put them on for I think we played a Beatles song, like I Saw Her Standing There or something. We put those on, and the girls are like screaming. Good thing we don't have a picture of that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
We didn't want a picture of that.
So so we got some nice experience there. But anyway, we started playing more and more on the circuit. We started getting gigs, at some of the East L.A. circuit places. And we had already done some. We were already playing around East L.A. when Billy Cardenas found us. And Billy Cardenas was managing the Blendells and the Premiers and Cannibal and the Headhunters and tons of bands. And once he picked up on us, he booked us at some things. I know he booked us once at St. Alphonsus Auditorium, which was big. But the ones I remember that he definitely booked us in was one was the Bel Air Rollerdrome in Pico Rivera. It was a roller skating place. It was a big place, and they used it as a dance venue on weekend nights. And what was exciting for us were we were on the bill with the Blendells. And the Blendells at the time had a hit, national hit, La 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 La. And we liked them a lot. They were a couple of years older than us, so we kind of looked up to them, and we loved their sound and their style. And we were on the bill with them that night. And but the funny thing was, right, we played their hit.
Yes.
And tell them what Billy said.
Billy says, "What are you guys thinking about? You can't do that. You can't play their hit." And we did it as like a tribute. We thought, hey, we'll show them we learned them their song. And Mark was really he really liked the lead guitar player for the Blendells, Rudy Valona. And so it was kind of like, hey, I learned your lead, blah blah blah. But we got scolded pretty good. That wasn't a thing to do. You don't play the Stars song before they come on.
Showbiz no.
Yes.
But what did we know? And then we did another one that he booked us in was Rainbow Gardens in Pomona. Now, Rainbow Gardens had been a popular Friday, Saturday night venue at the time where the Mixtures and the Romancers and the Righteous Brothers and a lot of bands were playing, and it was packed with dancers. Well, they tried a Sunday tardeada over there. They would start about 4 o'clock, like 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock. And we did at least 3 of those shows. And one of them, we were on the bill with the Romancers. We were on the bill with the Blendells, the Jaguars with the Salas Brothers. Salas Brothers later founded Tierra in the 70s. So we played with a lot of these groups, the Desires. And that was kind of fun. I remember. Do you have memories of that place?
Yeah, when we got to play there, since we were just one of the bands that was going to come in, and being the younger kids, they always treated us that way. What the stage in the front had steps going up to the main stage, so we would have to set up on the steps. On one of the steps, there was like a level in between the top level and it was just, I just remember being squashed in there in the drums and hoping that I didn't fall over. And we never got to play up on the big stage.
Oh, really? I don't remember that.
Yeah. So that's what I didn't like it.
Yeah, but that's another thing I should probably interject right now is that over the years, you and I talk about memories, and oftentimes you remember stuff that I have no idea about, and I remember stuff you don't remember at all. And the other difficult thing is the timeline, because
Right.
our whole history in the 60s into the early 70s was you on drums, Richard Rosas, later known as Rick Rosas, on bass, and me on guitar. That was the core. It was in all the bands.
It never changed.
Yeah, so we became the Men from S.O.U.N.D, then we became 1984, then we became Tango, and it was always the three of us and people coming and going all the way through. And because of that, it's hard to know, well, where did this band end and this one begin? And was this guy and Mark and the Escorts or the Men from S.O.U.N.D or both? It gets a little hazy there, but we'll do the best we can.
Right. Yeah. And even in one of the guys that we didn't mention was Ricky, our lead singer in the Escorts.
I was going to bring up that next, yeah.
And I just remember the first time I met Ricky.
Well, let's say who he was. Ricky Almaraz, who happened to be the younger brother of Carlos Almaraz, who wound up being perhaps the most famous Chicano visual artist.
Yes.
Major, world-class artist that became very famous.
Yeah. Well, Mark's brother was Carlos's best friend.
Yeah.
When they grew up together, kind of just like me and you.
Went to Humphreys Avenue School, and one day my brother took me up the street to Carlos's house. There was just a block up on McDonald Avenue, and I was only 3 years old, and my brother was about 11 or something. Now everybody knows how old my brother is, and and he took me up there by the hand, and there was Ricky, 3 years old also. So I met Ricky when he was 3, and I met Carlos, and Ricky and I became best friends. So when we needed a singer, I offered him the gig, and frankly, he wasn't a great singer. He was adequate, but he was very good looking and he was very charismatic, and the girls loved him. And
he didn't have any stage fright.
No, and he also was he had a voice that didn't sound too young. Like, I didn't sing for the first year and a half or so of our bands because I felt my voice was too childish. I didn't want to sing with this little high voice. But Ricky had a little bit deeper voice, so he was our singer for about 6 months.
Yeah,
and he's in that famous photo of us that's behind.
And he's in one of the famous Mark and the Escorts photos that ended up being. Let me see, I have it right here.
Behind you too.
It's behind me there.
Yeah, Ricky's on the far left.
Trini Balsuto, our saxophone player from Mark and the Escorts, ended up making these pictures, and then it was on our CD.
Right, it came out in 2000. Yes. Dionysus Records put out and it was on vinyl too, a vinyl and CD. East Side Sound Volume 2 featuring Mark and the Escorts. It had our 4 recordings on it that we later did, so we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. And it had a lot of the other East L.A. groups. But so Ricky was in the band, and he did some, a lot of nice gigs with us. And then the 5th member we got was Trini Basulto on tenor sax. And
right.
I'm not sure if he started on alto, maybe it was tenor. And Robert Warren brought him over. I think you knew him from Belvedere Junior High.
He did start on alto sax.
Okay.
In the band,
and we were going to Griffith, but they were going to Belvedere, a rival junior high. And he came over, and he had some chops for he was only 15 or something, and he had some chops, so we got him in the band. So now we have, drums, guitar, bass, singer, and sax. So we're a 5-piece for a spell.
Right.
As I said, it's hard to keep things chronological because it's all so blurry, but we got to go back a little bit. When we were 4-piece with Richard, we also did another little mini tour with my dad. He took us with his band. We were crammed in the station wagon with his his band, a couple of cars. And he took us up to, I think it was Modesto and San Jose and Stockton,
Right.
three cities, and we would open for him. And again, we were like these little kids, so we were a novelty, and people were nice to us.
Yes.
Good reaction. But it was an eye-opening thing for us to be on the road with these grizzled old jazz musicians. They were
Right.
drinking and doing all kinds of stuff. And but anyway, so what are your memories of that?
Just that, like you said, we were crammed into your dad's station wagon, and luckily for us, traveling with Lalo, he would sell out every place that he played.
Mhm.
So we just had a built-in great crowd, and they knew that you were his son, and we just went over really well. I don't remember not having fun on those trips, and I forgot. I think it was the keyboard player in your dad's
Yes, I was going to bring him up.
band, and I remember one time he was back there he was sitting back with us, and he says, "Okay, let's start rhyming stuff." And so then,
Oh yeah,
it's frog farts, and it just
like alliteration. Yeah, tiger
yeah,
kids.
yeah. And so it was just a fun experience being with these musicians, being with your dad, and just a great audience response. It just made you feel so good.
Well, let me say this about his name was Pete Alcaraz, and he was a great, great, great piano player. He played with my dad since probably the early 50s, and he was on the road with him in the 50s. And he played the great piano part on Los Chucos Suaves.
Oh,
He
okay.
was an incredible musician. However, he was a serious alcoholic. He'd drink every night, and he'd be almost toasted, but he'd be toasted by the end of the night. So the in joke was, the truth was, my dad would say, "Pete, you're drunk again." And he'd go, "True."
Finally, when we got to after we played San Jose, your dad took us up to San Francisco, and I think he had enough of us, and he bought us all tickets to fly home back, and we didn't have to drive with him back.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure the musicians were going, "Oh, we don't want to be traveling with these kids, man. We can't even do our thing." So we were flown home.
yes.
You know what? I forgot about that. You had reminded me a few years ago about that.
Yeah, it was. I was excited because I had never been on an airplane before, and that was our first flight, and Richard, being the practical joker that he always was, in one of the gift shop in the airport, he ended up buying a whoopee cushion and trying to slide it under people's seat before they sat down in the airport. And
I got it. So, like as I mentioned, Trini Basulto joined after once Ricky and Trini were in the band. Now we're talking 6 months later or whatever it was. One of Richard's relatives got us a gig in Chandler, Arizona. And so my dad just took us, he just took us. I don't remember, did he perform? I don't know. He didn't perform.
I think he just performed at the people's houses.
No, he didn't perform with us on the show, on the dance.
No.
Yeah. So he took us. And we played in Chandler, and it went over really well because we were a big deal. These guys from L.A., kids, we were a big deal. So we did that gig, and then he took us on to Tucson, that's his hometown, and we went over to one of my mom's brother's house, and we played on the front porch, and all the neighbors came over, and the relatives came over, and and one of my cousins was a hardcore dude. I think they killed a goat, remember that? And they hung it upside down, and they drained it, and they made steaks out of it. I mean, it was hardcore farm stuff, but
it was it was a great barbecue.
Yeah. And And then we went out to the desert one day, and Trini got a big cactus stuck on his arm and couldn't pry it off.
Right.
Anyway,
We were
lots of fun.
horsing around next to those cactus plants, and it was one of those that, the more you tried to pull it off, the deeper it got
Yeah.
stuck into your skin.
Yeah. It's hardcore. Anyway, that was that. Let's get back to East L.A. So then we started getting very popular and playing a lot of the venues, the Big Union, the Little Union,
Right.
Ballroom, Kennedy Hall. But Billy Cardenas took us into the recording studio.
Right.
He took us to the same studio in Hollywood called Stereo Masters that the Blendells, the Premiers, Cannibal had recorded in, the Midnighters recorded there. And at that age, I was barely turning 15, you were probably 14. Billy would just tell us, what to record. Hey, record this song, Get Your Baby.
Mhm.
And Get Your Baby had been written by a couple of guys from the Mixtures, a band that was part of the East Side Sound, but they were from up north, where is it? Ventura. But anyway, the Blendells had recorded it on the B side of, I think, one of their records. And so he told us to record it. So we came up with our own version. I actually wrote a new bridge to it because it was all one chord. And of course, I didn't get any credit for it. I guess that would be considered more arrangement, but I added a bridge to it. And later, after us, the Premiers recorded it, and then Cannibal and Hernandez recorded it with a lyric. So
With a lyric, right.
4 East L.A. bands recorded that song. Ours for some reason has survived. I mean, it wound up being on all kinds of compilation albums. And in 2017, it wound up in a major motion picture, like 50 years later, Logan
Right.
Lucky, starring Channing Tatum, Daniel Craig, Katie Holmes. And we wound up on the soundtrack album. The whole record was played in the movie, which was so surreal,
It was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
When
Go ahead.
I remember you called me and you had just seen it. I remember you had just left the theater and you said, Ernie, our song's in this movie. And so either the following day or that week, I went to go see it. And it's mind-blowing to be sitting there in the theater and then your song comes on
those big, great speakers,
on as loud as all the other great music that's on this movie. And then it plays from the beginning all the way to the end, and they use it.
Yeah.
They choreographed the song so that it went from one scene, and then when we all said 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it changes to another scene.
It's almost like a music video.
I was totally mind-blowing, and then it fades out just like the record.
Well, the thing that I remember about seeing it that was mind-blowing was that, when we did Get Your Baby, we did it all together. There was no, like nowadays, all these, Pro Tools or digital technology,
right.
Or even it was just 2-track. So we had to all play it all the way through, no overdubs, and do it right, And so we recorded the song, and then Billy had us get around a mic and just start yelling and making noise because he wanted to make it sound live and exciting. And so, I remember Robert Warren saying Twine, because Twine Time was out. It was a record. And Trini would yell out something and we all were yelling stuff. So 50 years later, I'm sitting in this theater watching this major movie and hearing this thing like it was recorded yesterday. And I could hear, there's Robert yelling this, and there's Magana's voice, and I can hear us. And I'm saying, when we were recording that song in March of 65, we had no idea that 50 years later it would be in a major movie. And maybe that's why we were recording it, because 50 years later it was going to be in this movie. But
they needed a garage band tune for the movie.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about this soundtrack for this movie. All of the bands on there are kind of historic rock bands. Creedence
Clearwater.
Yeah. What did I tell you that guy was?
What are you thinking of the other artists that were on the album?
Oh, yeah. Lord Sutch. he was one of the first guys from England that was doing the rock scene over there.
Was he on that album?
Yes,
Yeah, but
yes,
so was John Denver and Dr. John, and I think
right.
Bo Diddley, for God's
I
sake.
have the
Yeah,
the album,
and there's Mark and the Escorts, the third from the
and
bottom.
yes, we're on with just about all of these great rock artists, and we're on there. So it was just, it's funny how that song just, it's still alive.
It survived, yeah.
It just had something different than the other East LA bands that recorded the same tune. It just had that excitement in the record. And one of my friends, a DJ that got a hold of me through Facebook and said, when I'm doing a show and I want to kick it into another gear, the first record I put on is Get Your Baby, and he says it changes the whole night.
It's got a lot of excitement on it. It was also on a compilation in the late 90s. It was called Mind Rocker out of England. It was a 13 vinyl LP set with it had the Knickerbockers and the Leaves and all these groups, from the mid 60s out of, some big time groups that had hits. And we were on there with them. And then a few years later, they released it as I think a 7 CD set or something, which I have. And we're on there with all these groups. And there was another one called Jump, Jive, and Harmonize that had the Midnighters, and it had our version of Get Your Baby. So Get Your Baby has been on a lot of compilations. It's been mentioned in a lot of books. And ironically, the first record we ever made when we were kids might be the most well-known record we've done. As we got better and better over the years, songwriting and sophisticated, and that little record, doesn't go away. Let's see so then a few months later, Billy took us in again, and he told us to record Dance With Me, which was another song that the Blendells had recorded, but the Blendells had broken up. And so I think he thought, well, that record stalled because they broke up. Why don't these guys record it? So we did a very good version of Dance With Me, a vocal, and we sounded very professional on it. I mean, it's a good sounding record. And yes, by then, Richard Magana was in the band, and we got a baritone sax player in the band. And he could sing, so he sang harmony with me on the La La La's. But the lead singer, because I still wasn't singing lead yet, and Ricky was gone, so Billy brought this guy in to sing lead on Dance With Me. And to this day, we don't remember who he was. I asked Billy over the years, he didn't know who he was. So to this day, he's a mystery.
Just a mystery singer.
Mystery guy, yeah. Came in, went out. We never saw him again.
Yeah.
And we never knew who it was.
But he did a good vocal too.
He did a nice vocal, he had a nice voice. And the flip side of both records were instrumentals. One was Tough Stuff and one was Silly Putty. And I think Billy created those names of the songs, which were cool names. And stuff that we just came up with in rehearsal. And Silly Putty was kind of a jazzy thing. It wasn't too bad.
Right. And at that period of time, we were rehearsing at Richard's basement.
Oh, yes.
And there was, that was a great place to rehearse. And a lot of shenanigans went on in there too.
But once again, we were so lucky. Like, we were lucky to have your dad to take us places and take all those pictures of us. And we were lucky that Richard's house, his father had built this incredible basement. It was like a little nightclub.
Right.
It had a bar. It had those Naugahyde sort of seats along the wall, like you'd see in a bar or a restaurant.
The original man cave.
Yeah, it was a man cave, and it had good lighting, and we could rehearse there and get loud. So we were lucky we had that as a rehearsal place.
Yes.
One thing we didn't mention that you had mentioned to me earlier, off camera, was how it became Mark and the Escorts, and that had nothing to do with me. We started as the Escorts all the way through, and we added Richard, then we added Ricky, and Trini was in the band, and Trini had a print shop at Garfield High School, and he printed us up some band cards, and he printed it up as Mark and the Escorts.
Right.
And I think he did it because at the time there were a lot of bands with names like that. Ronnie and the Casuals, Art and the Nightlighters, Bobby and the Esquires. It was kind of a cool thing. So, I guess he saw me as the leader, and so it just and it stuck. And then Billy Cardenas, by then Billy Cardenas had already printed up cards later, just right after Mark and the Escorts, and then on the records, Mark and the Escorts. It just stuck.
Yeah, it was one of those where we were going to have a rehearsal, and Trini shows up, and he's all excited, and he says, "Look, I made these cards," and we're looking at him, and then it's like Mark and the Escorts. We were kind of like, it was kind of a little bit of a shock, but it just.
Nobody protested.
No, we didn't jump you or anything.
I don't think well, another thing we had mentioned on the phone the other day was right around that stage, around 65, when Mark and the Escorts were, I think by then we were a 7-piece. Now we added Richard Magana on baritone sax, because Billy said, you got to have a baritone in the band. Ronnie the Casuals had a baritone. A lot of his bands had a baritone, which was cool. You had that low sax, you had a tenor and a bari. We had him in, and then we got Joe Cabral on Farfisa organ. So when we recorded those records, we had a 7-piece.
Right.
They had organ on them. They had, a bari and tenor. But we played a gig at the Boulevard Theater sometime in 65 on the bill with Little Ray and the Progressions. And it was at the movie theater, and there was a stage, and in front of the screen is where we played. And is that the day we wore the big ties?
Yeah, Robert's father had all this collection of ties. They were
old-timey ties.
Old-timey back from the swing era. And they were beautiful ties, but they were just back at the time, the ties were getting real thin, and these ties were just monster fat ties. And the guys ended up putting them on for that gig.
Well, Robert brought them over, right?
Yeah, Robert brought them over. Everybody put one on. And that's when you guys used to do that, get down on your knees and bend backwards with your guitars.
And all this choreography.
You had a lot of stage presence, and those ties ended up being a fad. I remember the dance shows that used to come on. Remember?
Well, I think it was Sam Riddle's 9th Street West at some point. Not too long after that, we saw some people wearing those ties. So.
Yes, the boys were wearing the same. They had on the same wide ties that we had. We wore them for a little bit, right?
Oh, yeah, a few gigs. Well, the other thing, speaking of the way we dressed, now our first uniforms were very cool, and they're the ones on that picture behind you. We were the first band from East L.A. to have these collarless coats.
Yes,
the Beatles, had collarless coats, but we got these. They were gold in color, kind of a golden color, and collarless,
kind of a fluorescent gold.
Yeah, and we wore turtlenecks, not ties. So that was kind of a very Beatlesque look we had. So there's so much stuff with the Mark and the Escorts story alone that it's impossible, as I say, to be what do you call it? Chronological.
Right.
So, we're jumping around a little bit, but so what? This is East LA music stories. They don't have to be in order. They never have been.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk about a few things. Going way back, we mentioned we were together in the Humphreys Avenue School band from
orchestra.
From the third grade. And then when we both went to Griffith Junior High School, we were in that band. And
right.
We had an incredible teacher named Arthur Freeman. Talk about him.
Well, Mr. Freeman, his brother was a jazz artist, right?
Ernie Freeman.
Very famous.
Yeah.
And we didn't know that at the time. We just knew, our music teacher, Mr. Freeman. And I really learned a lot from him as far as, I remember one time we were learning this one piece, and I wasn't coming in correctly. and he told me, he sat me to the side and he says, you know, you have to anticipate your next beat, anticipate it. And that really, believe it or not, that little piece of advice really helped in me keeping my rhythm.
Wow.
And I'll never forget that. And then years later, if you remember, we were doing a session in Hollywood, and the studio door opens, and out comes our school teacher, Mr. Freeman, with a beret on, real cool, jazz looking. And he had just finished a session, and he recognized us, and you know, he was as shocked as we were.
Right, exactly.
And so all of a sudden now we're on a peer level with our teacher, you know.
At least for that moment. But
yeah,
the other story was when I got in trouble for something. I was first chair clarinet. There was like two first chair, two second chair, two third chair, and I got in trouble. So he put me to the last place, you know, down the last seat of the third.
You got banished to the end of
Got banished to
the line.
And then on Fridays we'd have challenges, so I had to challenge my way, you know, compete with each guy on a piece of music.
You had to fight your way back to the top.
And I did, right?
Yes, you did.
And then I behaved after that.
Yes, but
he was a cool guy and very talented.
Yes, very. And it was fun going on those little, when we used to do the shows, the band shows, and we go to different schools. Do you remember that?
Uh-huh.
And you know, that was part of me appreciating my talent and showing it to other people. You know, it was a fun. It made me feel so good.
A little tour.
Yeah. Right.
So there's some things we got to talk about, special events. Like one of them was when we got to play at the Shrine Auditorium on that West Coast East Side Review show.
Yes.
Most of the East L.A. bands were playing there, especially the Billy Cardenas bands, but a very famous concert. And a couple of years later, they put out an album of the same name, but using studio recordings by all the groups.
I do have the poster.
Oh, yeah, that's not too small.
Yeah.
Okay, well, okay, leave it like that. I'll read it. The Atlantics, the Blendells, the Blue Satins, Cannibal and the Headhunters, Ronnie and the Casuals, Mark and the Escorts, the Heartbreakers, the Jaguars with the Solace Brothers, Little Ray, the Heartbreakers, the Little Heartbreakers, the Medallions, the Midnighters, the Pageants, the Premiers, Four Queens, Romancers, the Sisters, and the S.O.U.N.D Brothers. February 21st, 1965. And the MC was Dave Hull, the Hullabalooer from KRLA, who was a big-time DJ at the time. And
we're still, I mean, we're 14 years old.
Yeah, we're still 15-ish, 14, 15. Yeah. And I remember the Midnighters, you know, when they went out the stage door, the girls were screaming like, you know, the Beatles.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And after the concert, the fans came around to the side and we signed autographs. And that was fun.
That must have been one of the first times.
Yeah, I think so. That was a fun time.
And like I said, 2 years later, Eddie Davis put out an album, West Coast East Side Review, which is very collectible today.
Yes.
A nice album. So since I was mentioning all these bands on that West Coast East Side Review, just as a shout out to our fellow musicians from the era, these are the bands that we played with on the various gigs, according to the flyers that I still have, that you can see on my website. Okay. We played with Robert and Johnny, You're Mine and We Belong Together, Little Ray, the Blendells, the Jaguars with the Solace Brothers, the Rhythm Playboys, the Blue Satins, the Romancers, Ronnie and the Casuals, the Desires, Four Queens, the Blue Notes, the Atlantics, Cannibal and the Headhunters, the Heartbreakers, the Little Heartbreakers, the Medallions, the Pageants, the S.O.U.N.D Brothers, the Sisters, the Night Themes, the Counts, the Vandells, Little Egypt, the Impalas, VIPs, who later became El Chicano, the Premiers, the Jades, the Eternals, the Originals, Danny and the Starlighters, Roy Head, Treat Her Right, We played with them at the Montebello Ballroom and the Royal Gems. That's just from the Flyers. There was a lot of bands at the time.
Yes.
There was some more I left out. Don Julian, Bobby Day, Don and Dewey. These were some of the guest artists. Sunny Night, the Larks, Leon Peels, and the Blue Jays. Johnny Flamingo, and then there's some more bands: the Dreamers, the Exciters, the Epics, the Mystics, and the Montclairs.
And we rehearsed with the sisters, and we backed them up.
Oh, that's right.
Remember that?
Yeah, we backed them up. I think it was at the Great Western Exhibit Center in that big giant hall, as I recall. Yeah. And then another interesting gig was the Johnson's Market parking lot on Whittier Boulevard, where all the bands played on the back of a flatbed truck.
Yeah.
And a lot of bands, and including the Midnighters, Little Ray, the Ambertones, the Counts, us, Mark and the Escorts. And that was kind of a fun gig. A lot of people showed up.
Yeah, the whole parking lot was full of people.
Also, I thought I'd mention that there were a couple of guys that joined the band way at the end. And one of them was Richard Maharo. And I believe he was even in part of the Men from S.O.U.N.D. It kind of blurs over. It's hard. But he was unique because he was younger than us even,
He was younger. Yeah.
And what was cool about him was he had this whole vibe, kind of a Bob Dylan vibe. He had these boots on, cool, like Spanish boots and Levi's, and he played the blues harp. And I remember he used to sing Spider and the Fly by the Rolling Stones. And it gave us a whole new dimension to have a blues harp.
Right. Yeah, it just his whole look.
Yeah.
He had more of the cool Bob Dylan type look going.
Right. Sure, he was into that. And the other guy was Richard Morin. He was in the tail end of Mark and the Escorts, and I think one of the versions of the Men from S.O.U.N.D, but we'll get to that later. But they were near the end. And the other thing to talk about, the last thing about Mark and the Escorts, are the recordings we did with my dad. We didn't mention his name earlier, for those who don't know, Lalo Guerrero, who's considered the father of Chicano music. And we did a lot of recordings with him throughout the 60s, starting when we were 14. We, on my website, I have a list of all the records we were on, but the ones that stand out for me, there's three worth talking about. One was, the main one was La Minifalda de Reinalda.
La Minifalda.
I was 15 at that time. It had to be late 65, something like that. And I had a solid body 12-string Rickenbacker. And I played this interesting lead. Every time there was a break, I just did this thing with a 12-string. And but what made the session so unique and so incredible was, and my dad, genius that he was, it was two bands. He had a conjunto, like a Tex-Mex conjunto, set up on one side of the studio with an accordion player, and then we, the rock band, were on the other side, like dueling bands. And so the song started out like a ranchera, like Tex-Mex, with an accordion, and he's singing the verse in that style. And then he goes, "Canto así," and then that's my solo. And it goes into rock and roll. And then we start playing, and then we stop. And then the other band comes in, he starts singing in Spanish again, that style. And then we came in again. But again, no tricks, no overdubs.
No.
Right on to 2-track. I probably take one take live. And we killed it, and they killed it. And that was a very unique thing. And after that, and it was a big hit. And it was subsequently recorded by this group in Mexico. I think it was Los Johnny Jets or somebody had a hit with it in Mexico. But because of the success of that, we did another one with the same thing with the two bands. And that was Felipe El Hippie. Remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, but let's leave that story alone. But we did another one. Another one worth mentioning was Los Greñudos, another rock tune, man. Talking sometime in 65, and my dad sang his ass off, and in Spanish, rock and roll. And we sounded pretty damn good. A friend of mine said, "Man, you guys sound like Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs." We'd had that vibe with the Farfisa organ and the way we played, and that's a rocking track, Los Granudos. So I think that takes care of Mark and the Escorts, unless you have anything else to add.
I think we covered it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, you're the only person besides myself that can tell this story we're telling today, because you're the only guy that was in all those bands, Mark and the Escorts, the Men from S.O.U.N.D, 1984, and Tango.
Right.
The only other guy that could have told the story is Richard Rosas,
Richard, yeah.
who passed away in 2014. So the story is within the two of us. You're the only guy that can take us through this long ride, and it may take 2 episodes. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, you're the only one. Now, I'm going to interview our good friend John Valenzuela, who was in Tango and the Mud Brothers, and he can
Right.
tell. He's the only one left to tell that story since Richard's gone. Besides me. But he wasn't in our earlier groups, although we knew him back then. But that's yet another story I'll get into with him. Okay, so Mark and the Escorts evolved into the Men from S.O.U.N.D.
Right.
At that time, by about 66, the British invasion was in full bloom, and names like the Escorts and the Counts and those kind of names seemed a little dated, the Fireballs and whatever. And so I was looking for a more modern name that sounded a little bit British invasion or just a little bit more modern. And I forgot how it happened, but we came up with the name The Men from S.O.U.N.D, based on the TV series The Man from U.N.C.L.E. It was a spy show. It was very popular. And it was The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and each letter had a period after it there. It stood for something, that spy organization. So I thought, it would be The Men from S.O.U.N.D, S period, O period, U period, N period, D period. And I know where I got the word sound from. There was a band that opened for the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl when I saw them, and they were called Sounds Incorporated. And I thought it was really cool to have the word sound as the name of the band. So I just said The Men from S.O.U.N.D. Now, it actually didn't stand for anything, but we made a joke. I think our joke was it stood for Society of Unusual Naked Dudes. That was our own, what it stood for.
I'm glad I never knew that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember, Richard Modine had some cards printed up. Remember those cool cards we had?
Yes.
And it had the word sound was like the word uncle on that TV show. And we had John Lennon on it, his silhouette of John Lennon on it.
His silhouette.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's how the Men from S.O.U.N.D got going. And by then the sax players, we didn't have sax players anymore.
No.
And so the band moved on from that whole style.
Right. And we lost our keyboard player too, right?
No, he was in the Men from S.O.U.N.D earlier. Remember?
Was he?
Remember the El Monte gig with those velour?
Oh, okay. He was still
in the band, still was Men from S.O.U.N.D. So at the very beginning, so I say everything blurs together. He was in the very beginning of the Men from S.O.U.N.D for a little while, and so was Richard Maharo. He moved on with us, and I believe I'm not sure if Richard Modine did. I'm not sure, but I know Maharo did that period. So now we have this different band. We're doing more British invasion.
Yeah.
And by now I'm singing. I finally started singing when I was about 15. Now I'm a lead vocalist in the band. And you were a lead vocalist in the band. I think you started singing lead before I did. If I'm not mistaken, but I'm not positive.
I'm not I can't remember that.
Around the same time. But you were a legitimate lead vocalist, and you would sing our Eric Burdon tunes, all the Animal stuff. You said When a Man Loves a Woman.
Right. That's when you coined that phrase, vavoom.
I'm glad you're telling all the funny stories, and I never wasn't sure what you want to talk about. Yeah, but your voice was so booming, you were like that cartoon character. Vavoom!
Well, what happened was we did this one gig, and a lot of the times they didn't have the boom stand on the microphone. They just shove a regular microphone and bring it all the way down, and then the mic's just right in front of your face, So this PA was one of the stronger PAs, and so it caught me taking a breath in, and you could hear it on the speakers, and so you guys were laughing, and I didn't know what was going on. I kept playing the song, and then at the end, that's when you says, yeah, you were like Vavoom in there. It's like it was that cartoon character.
Yeah, well, even any day of the week you were Vavoom because you had a booming voice, and when you were on, you were on.
So were the songs that I sung, were they chosen by you, or did I have some input in that?
I am sure you did, but I'm sure I probably gave you a few, but you probably picked some of your own.
Yeah, I remember I liked the Eric Burden songs.
Well, you were great on the Eric Burden songs.
The John Kay songs.
Oh yeah.
Steppenwolf songs.
Yeah.
And it was just fun. It was fun. Like I said, when I sang, I didn't have any problem with my speech impediment.
Yeah.
And it was a fun way to express myself. And then afterwards, I'd have to be careful so I wouldn't embarrass myself by stuttering or doing anything like that.
I think, but as the years went on, weren't you getting a little better with it as it went? It kind of improved from when you were a kid, from what I remember.
Right. I mean, I did go to like speech classes in grammar school, and so you just learn that you're the person that's creating the problem, so you just have to calm down and not stress out.
So the thing about the Men from S.O.U.N.D is there were like at least 3 versions, and once again I'll repeat. The 3 guys that went through all these bands from 63 to 74 were you on drums, Rick Rosas on bass, and me on guitar. That we were in all the bands. But the other members changed. So the first version, I had Joe Cabral for a little while, Rick Maharo for a little while. Oh yeah, and I think Richard Morin was in too for a little while. Oh, he definitely was. Richard Morin definitely was.
Yeah.
And the highlight of that period was when we played at the Big Union, and we got to back up Dobie Gray.
We got
had a major hit with "I'm In with the In Crowd," and so he was a hit chart artist, big time guy. And the amazing thing was that we got to back him up. I don't know how we were selected, but let me show you this. Here's the flyer, and they misspelled Dobie. They made it with 2 B's, Dobie Gray. And the Midnighters were on the bill with Little Willie G, the Ambertones, the Men from S.O.U.N.D, the Exotics, the Runabouts, the Essence, and the Impalas. April 9th, 1966. Anyway, Dobie Gray came to our rehearsal, which was a mind blower. We were like these 15, 16-year-old kids. And Dobie Gray, a star, comes to our rehearsal. And we learned a few tunes, and one of them was Hitchhike by Marvin Gaye, and of course the In Crowd. And then we backed him up, and we must have done a good job because he played with us. So that was a real feather in our cap, and we have pictures of it, and there's some on my website. But that was a highlight. But so then the second version of the Men from S.O.U.N.D had Tony Rodas on Farfisa organ, and George Ochoa as a lead vocalist. George had been in the Slauson Brothers already. He was very popular and well-known already. Good-looking, charismatic guy, good singer. And we added him. And that, to me, was the best band we had in that whole early to mid-'60s period. Because Tony was a trained, pianist, and he was really good. And George Ochoa was a legitimate, strong lead singer, frontman. And we had 3 lead singers, George, you, and me. So that was 3 different lead singers. We could do 3-part harmonies. We were doing Taxman by the Beatles, and you name it, 3-part harmonies. And that band was really tight, really good. We played a lot of gigs every weekend. But but that band kind of got forgotten because we never really made a record, whereas Mark and the Escorts did.
No.
And then the third version of the Men from Sound was Richard Modine came back, or Richard Morin, either way, and Steve Verdugo joined. But I think that was the first band he'd been in. But he was turned out to be a talented singer-songwriter, but he was in for a while there at the end.
Right.
But that second band was the one that was really something special. And my big memory for that band with Tony Rodas was when we played at the Garfield High School Assembly in 1966, I believe. We were at our peak. We were hot. We were playing on the weekend. And I don't know why a high school would do that, especially way back then, but they had a double assembly so the whole student body could see the show. And they put on this rock concert, the Men from Sound, the Exotics, that had a couple of the Delgado brothers in it, and Euphoria, which was a band that featured Conrad Lozano on bass, later to be in Los Lobos, and for a while in Tierra before Los Lobos. And man, that was a killer concert, and that was the peak of my high school experience, because to be able to play in front of your own student body and kick butt like that was pretty amazing. And I remember the songs we did. You know, we did CC Rider, Eric Burden, and you sang the shit out of that. And then we did Taxman, Beatles. We did 96 Tears, and we did I Only Have Eyes for You. I only have eyes for you. Shabbat, Shabbat. And George Ochoa sang that beautifully. We might have done something else, but do you remember anything else? What do you remember about that show?
I just remember that back then, all of the bands, they were friendly, but we were competing against each other.
That's for sure.
And so there was always that edge there that, you know, you didn't want to be too friendly because, you know, they're the other band. And but, you know, being there with all of the bands that were popular at your high school, because that's another thing about me that made a big difference between you and Richard, is that you guys went to the same school district, and I moved out to Monterey Park, and I ended up going to the Alhambra school district. So I missed out on a lot of the inside stuff that you guys did. But it was fun to be there and see that we were with all the bands that were about the same age, and we were all competing for the same spot, you know.
And those bands,
and to tell you the truth, we kicked ass.
Oh, we definitely kicked ass. And the Exotics were great too. And we're not saying the Exotics weren't good, but we were as good as we could have been, you know.
Yes.
I remember talking to was it Bobby Delgado? Or yeah, we said he said they were saying, you know, 30 years later, 40 years later, he told me, oh shit, they're playing Taxman. What are we gonna do now? You know, because we were competing, you know, in a good way. And I talked to Conrad Lozano years and years later, like 2007 or so. And he said, yeah, I remember, you know, and, you know, you guys did Taxman, and people remember that, you know.
Yeah.
And speaking of Conrad, the thing I remember about him was, is that he was very much a showman. I mean, I didn't even know who he was at the time. All I know is there was this bass player jumping around, and he had all kinds of effects on his bass, like reverb and delay and fuzz tone. And he was, you know, he was like a punk rocker before punk rock. So he was noticeable. He was like, wow, what's this guy doing? I later got to know him a bit in high school, but at that time I didn't know who he was. But that was a very special show that I remember. And then my big crowning thing was the vice principal was a guy everybody was afraid of. He'd give the swats and everything. And he was so impressed with us that he carried my amp for me. And I'm walking through lunch, the student body, and the vice principal's carrying my amp, and I'm behind him carrying my guitar. And I went, boy, this is victory right here. You know?
Oh, boy. That's a good one.
Now, the third version of the Men from Sound with Steve Verdugo and Richard Morin, the highlight of that was when we played at your school, Alhambra High School, on this show in the auditorium, on the bill with the Standells, who had a big hit at the time, Dirty Water, and the Second Helping, which happened to be Kenny Loggins' first band.
Right.
Did you get us that gig?
Yeah, it was my graduating class, and our friend Dan Murakami, who ended up being guitar tech for Dan Fogelberg, he was my best friend, and so he says, "Hey, you guys, you know, we're gonna do a concert, so we're thinking about getting the Standells, and we want you to play on the show," and that's how we got that gig.
Well, that was a great gig, man.
Yeah.
Hey, so when we were talking about Mark and the Escorts, I listed the bands we played on the bill with. I want to do the same thing for the men from S.O.U.N.D, just as a shout out to our musical brothers from that era. So the men from S.O.U.N D, on the flyers that I have, the bands we played with on the gigs were the Midnighters, the Ambertones, the Exotics, the Runabouts, the Essence, the Impalas, the Prophets, the Entertainers, Lil Ray and the Progressions, the Sisters, the VIPs, the Unusuals, the Enchantments, the Emeralds, the Righteous Rhythms, the Geliders, the Apollos, Bonaventures, the Epics, the Gems, Royal Topics, Centurions, IBMs, the Fabulous Sounds, Teen Turbans, the Royal Checkmates. We did one show with the Rivingtons, Papa Umau Mau, they had a big hit. And then when it started to get a little bit into the hippie thing, we backed up, we played with this group called the Euclid Avenue Express. And it was getting right into that era. They weren't from East L.A. though, I don't think. And like I said, the Standells and the Second Helping. So that was the men from S.O.U.N.D. And it was a great band, but since we didn't make a record, we're forgotten to history. You know, most people know Mark and the Escorts. Some people know Tango, the A&M thing. But the men from S.O.U.N.D is not on the radar anymore because we didn't make a record. But we did make one acetate at the Jimmy Jones studio, The Peddler and Lovely People, 2 songs that I wrote. And I had you sing The Peddler because I wanted the John Kay voice that you had. Yeah. So that was that. And that's it. That's pretty much, the gist of the men from S.O.U.N.D. But it was a good band, and like I said, especially that middle band with Tony Rodas and George Ochoa.
And one thing about our bands too is that some of the other East LA bands, they didn't really move forward with the music, but our band always moved. We were always doing the latest stuff,
Sure.
Whatever it was. And then you started writing your songs.
Right. The other thing too, and I've discussed it on a couple of other episodes, is the fact that we were one of the only East LA bands that did a lot of Beatles stuff. A lot of East LA bands did not because they preferred the Stones because it was more rhythm and blues, a little more bluesy. But the Emeralds did Beatles really great. We did a lot of them. Taxman, Drive My Car, some really cool stuff. And even when we were younger, we were doing Hard Day's Night, and I Saw Her Standing There and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Ambertones did some. The Midnighters might have done one or two. But not all the bands played Beatles stuff, but we were one of the ones that did.
Right.
Anything else on the men from S.O.U.N.D, or should we move on?
I think we could move on.
Okay. So now the next evolution of our band, with me, you, and Richard as the core, was called 1984. And I named that band, and I named us after the book by George Orwell about a coming time when people would have no privacy, and pretty much the world we live in now. Cameras everywhere. People can eavesdrop on our phone calls or check out our emails or our texts. There's no more privacy. Well, this thing was about that and worse. It was this real totalitarian kind of a world. And I had read the book, and so I named the band 1984. And sometimes we used the numbers 1984, and sometimes it was written out, 1984. And we didn't do a hell of a lot of gigs because we mainly became a recording band. Before I get into that, one of the first things we did as 1984 was we played at Gazzari's on the Sunset Strip.
That's right.
And it was probably late 68, somewhere in there. And it was Tony Rodas, me, you, and Rick Rosas. By then, George Ochoa was gone. And we got a gig at Gazzari's on the Sunset Strip. That was big time. And we played for a week, 6 nights, alternating with another band called the Abstracts. We'd do a set, they'd do a set. So we'd be doing 2 sets a night for 6 nights. And for the whole week, we got paid $200 total. So we made $50 each for the entire week. But that's the way it was because, you know, their attitude was, you're playing on the Sunset Strip. It's an honor. You're going to get a lot of publicity and a lot of notice, right? Years later, bands had to play for free to play in Hollywood. And now people have to pay to play.
They have to pay to play.
Yeah. So, but anyway, it was a great gig and great experience for us. And I just remember I got the flu really bad. And the last night or two, I played sick. But I remember we did some White Album stuff. This was, I believe, November of 1968. And the White Album was out. And we were doing stuff like Glass Onion and some of the stuff from the White Album. Do you have any memories of that gig?
Nothing that was spectacular other than it was just, you know, it wasn't that great of a room to play in. It just seemed like, you know, and then you got sick, you know, in the last couple of days, you were all wrapped up.
Yeah.
And, but we made it through and, you know, we got paid. So
it was a success.
Yeah, it was, you know, it was playing in Hollywood for the first time.
It might have been, yeah. And so, you know, we did a few gigs, but not many. We became a recording band, and this is how it happened. I answered an ad that was in the paper. This guy was looking for groups and material, and he had an office on Highland in Hollywood, and I was about 18, 19 years old. And I just went down there, and I took a reel-to-reel tape of some of my songs, and he heard them, and he goes, "Oh, that sounds pretty good," you know. And so he hooked us up with somebody who came like a second father to us, Tommy Coe, who was a producer, a musician. He had written a hit song called "How the Time Flies" for Bobby Bare, a country artist. And I think he'd played with Buck Owens. The guy who hooked us up with Tommy was named Stan Silver. And somehow they got us a record deal. Oh, I know how they did it. We pooled our money together and we decided to record an acetate at our own expense. And we wanted to book it at a good studio, and we picked Gold Star Studios because by then the Buffalo Springfield were out, and we love the Buffalo Springfield. So we saw that they did some recording there. So we said, let's call them and book some time. So we booked 4 hours at Gold Star, and you, me, Richard, and Tony Rodas went there, and we recorded 2 of my songs. One was called Baba, and one was called Amber Waves. And we practiced a lot, man. They were really tight. We went in there. I remember I used my 12-string Rickenbacker on those. Solid body, unfortunately. And we made a couple of great records. And talk about the engineer that engineered for us.
So we found out years later that the person that recorded us, he wasn't officially a recording engineer. He was the janitor of the Gold Star studio.
Okay. Well, let's put it this way. Let's say he must have been in training or ready to go, but he was bottom man on the totem pole of their engineering staff.
Yes.
But he did a good job. You know, he knew what he was doing.
Right.
Yeah,
it was.
That was kind of funny, though. You know, these young Chicanos, let's give him the janitor, you know. But he did a good job, and it sounded great. So now we had an acetate. Somehow with that acetate, they wound up getting us a record deal with Kapp Records, Kapp, which was an MCA label. And this was about a year before El Chicano got on Kapp Records and had Viva Tirado. This was in 69. What we did is we went in and recorded a song called Three's a Crowd at American Studios, which was a studio owned by Richie Podler, who was the producer of Steppenwolf and Three Dog Night at that time. He was a hugely successful producer. He had a great studio in Studio City. And we went there and recorded Three's a Crowd. Now, here's the story of Three's a Crowd. It was a song written by a guy named L.T. Josie, and he was later to write, or maybe he had already written Midnight Confessions. That was a song he had written. Maybe he had already had a hit with that. And Tommy had us record that. Now, I didn't want to sing it because I wanted to do my own stuff, and I wanted to be known for singing my own stuff. And I just didn't want to sing it. So I said, hey, Ernie, why don't you sing it? And you did. And Bavoom came out.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, it was an experience because Stan Silver ended up being my vocal coach for the 45. And I showed up at his office a few times and we went over. He would have it on a reel-to-reel and he would coach me on how to sing the song. And to me, it was really exciting because here I am, driving to Hollywood to have my vocal coach.
Excuse me.
Yeah, it was. I thought I was, I was it, So it was fun.
As Rick Rosas used to call you at the time, Mr. Three's a Crowd.
Yeah.
You were wearing your John K. sunglasses, and there goes Mr. Three's a Crowd.
So it ended up. It was a fun time recording in American Studios, as I remember. We did some really good musical tracks, and then they added horns. Horns.
Tommy brought in some big time studio horn section guys, and it was a great record. To me, it sounded like a hit. I don't know why we didn't get any promotion, but it's a good record. You sang your ass off, and again, 30 years later, our friend and your brother-in-law, John Valenzuela, who wound up in Tango later, said to me, you really dodged a bullet there. He goes, if that record had been a hit, Ernie would have been the lead singer in your band. He would have been the star, and I would have been the backup guy. What did I do? I should have sung that song. But anyway, I wasn't even thinking that way. It was like, I don't want to sing that song.
Yeah.
You do it, Ernie.
Well, the flip side, you sang the flip.
Right.
Piece.
But we didn't get to re-record that. They used the same track we did at Gold Star, but Tommy remixed it. He edited it. He cut out some of the solo sections to make it the right length. And so he just remixed that, and that was the B-side.
Right.
Yeah. So that was a great experience. And then we did a second single, and Tommy took us to Dave Hassinger's studio. And he was a very in-demand engineer, and his studio was very cool. And we went there and recorded two more of my songs. One of them was called No Matter How Long It Takes, that I sang. And the flip side, we re-recorded a new version of Baba. And once again, Tommy brought in a major, horn section. And that record sounds very good, And I thought it was never released because I never had more than a test pressing of that. But 30 years later, 40 years later, I found out it was at least released as a promotional copy. And I finally bought one online. So that was our history with MCA. We just did the two singles. But what came out of it that was so great was that Tommy Coe took us to this other studio. We recorded some more stuff. But before I say that, this is another very important story. So we had signed a contract with Stan Silver for 7 years, and a very bad contract for us. I think we hadn't even sent it to a lawyer. We were kind of just screwed. So Tommy Coe, by now, he loved us and we loved him. He was He sort of became our protector. We told him, hey man, we're trying to get Stan to sign this release. I think one of the parents of one of our, maybe it's Tony Rodas's parents or some, went to a lawyer and got a release form to get out of that contract. And Stan was beating around the bush and not signing it. So we told Tommy, hey man, Stan's not signing this thing. And we were rehearsing at some house in the valley. And Tommy called up Stan right on the moment, right then. Stan, come over here and sign this release. Oh man, I'm busy. I got some. Get your skinny ass down here right now, or I'm going to go over there and drag you over here. Stan comes right over, signs the release, and leaves. So,
he actually tore the paper a little bit when he signed it. He was pissed.
So Tommy protected us. And then he took us to this studio called Mark Studios, right next door to Gold Star on Santa Monica Boulevard. And he made a deal with the owner of the studio that he knew, that we could have free studio time if we record in off hours and on speculation. If we got a deal, then they could get paid something. And so that was one of the most fun we ever had, right? So for 6 months, we went several times a week to this studio and recorded at all hours. I mean, we'd start at midnight. It was off hours when other people
Right.
worked. Yeah. So we'd work from 12 to 6 a.m. Or maybe we'd get lucky and maybe we'd get in earlier one night, or maybe in the daytime once in a while. But we were living in the studio. It was like a clubhouse. We had a lot of fun, a lot of laughs. We were smoking pot in the studio. We're playing at midnight. We're recording and smoking pot and having laughs and taking our time. And it was like recording school for us, right? We learned so much about recording. And
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So what did you and Richard learned what? Remember? Well, he taught you guys the importance of not only of time, but of groove and
yes.
of locking in the bass drum and the bass.
Yes, just being very simple, and I remember on my snare drum, I always had a habit of, after I did the one beat, I would let my stick bounce on and so you learn all of the techniques of how to record a clean track. And then once you learn how to do that, then you could learn how to clue in with each other and get the feel going and getting a groove going. And it was the perfect college,
All right.
And
like you say, it was
we were just fortunate enough that he had the patience, to do that with us.
And that he dug us enough and believed in the music enough to put all that time for free in his life. And he had a family. Right. I look back on it, I go, how did he do that? But he liked my music, and we went in and recorded 10 more songs.
Right.
And one of them was Lila Love Me Tonight, Dare Touchy Mary Lou, Big Brother Blues, which tied into the 1984 name.
Right.
Big Brother's Watching Over Us. And you sang one called Waiting Too Long. And so it was fun, just recording it all the time. And what was cool is here we were like 19 years old or so. And at 6 a.m, we'd be driving back to East L.A. in Richard's hippie van. And at 6 a.m. and everybody else is like going to work. We're going home to bed. So we got, this is pretty cool. I like this,
Yeah, the only problem for me at that time was I was going to East L.A. College.
I remember that.
And I had to drop out. I couldn't continue on because of our, we were on call to record our songs.
But your dad wasn't happy about that.
No, he wasn't. Yeah, it was a tough time, It was a tough time, but we were doing so well. And we all those songs from that 1984 album, they were pretty dang good.
and they were never released. So what happened? Oh, and by the way, let's talk about some of our experiences there. While we were recording there, people would come and go, and we were able to meet some amazing people. One day, I got to meet Buck Owens. He came in to see Tommy, so I got to meet Buck Owens. The Jackson 5 came in to record when they were kids, running around playing.
They were doing their first. Well, they had just moved down to
From Detroit,
Southern California, yeah,
yeah.
and they were doing their first Christmas album.
Was that it?
That's what they were doing, yeah.
And their producer, Hal David, was there.
Hal David was there, and Michael would be in the little parking lot there next to the studio playing catch with his father.
Oh, didn't you tell me that you and Richard got smoked pot with his dad?
Me and Richard were in the hallway back there, and Joe Jackson strolls back and he looks at us and he says, I know you guys got something. And he says, what do you got? I want to share it with you. So Richard pulled out a joint, and we got high with the Jackson's 5 father.
I wasn't there that day. And boy, by this time, yeah.
But the only thing he said was, he says, just don't let the boys know. Yeah.
By that time, I mean, Richard had a line on the best pot in the world. It was great stuff.
Oh,
and he was such an expert at rolling joints that, man, they looked so perfect, right? And he'd roll them really fast.
Yeah, and also from meeting Hal David and the Jackson 5, we did get to talk to the older brothers, Tito and them. I remember they were big Beatle fans. We were talking about the Beatles, and then they got us tickets to their first concert there at the Forum.
I remember that.
Los Angeles. Yeah, it was fun. That was a fun time.
And also we met Larry and Merle, the bass player and drummer from Loggins and Messina.
Right.
First album, they would come in.
Yeah, they'd come in, and they were really nice guys. Everybody everybody that we met there was very nice.
Now, I often wondered, and I'm not saying this is a fact, but I often wondered, because they came around a bit and hung out, and they heard our music sometimes.
Yes.
And on that first Loggins and Messina album called "Sitting In," there was a mega hit. There were 2 songs that I thought might have been influenced by what they heard, and maybe, I don't know if they got a copy. But one of the songs on the album was a song I wrote called "Tugboat Tommy," written about Tommy Coe, our producer, because he used to be a tugboat captain before he came back to Hollywood over in Florida. So I wrote this song about Tugboat Tommy, and the theme of the thing was that Tugboat Tommy was searching for light. He was searching for peace of mind, and they had a song on the first album called "Peace of Mind."
Right.
And then I had a song about Jamaica, which was "Dare I Touch You, Mary Lou."
Right.
It had Vahivala about Jamaica. So could be, I'm not saying, but could be.
Everybody gets influenced by everybody. So
absolutely. And there is thievery too. You can steal ideas, and that's not plagiarism, but you can take ideas, let's see what else.
Plus 2 of the other people that were there at that Mark Studios was Bill Schnee.
Oh, Bill Schnee was like a friend of Tommy's, and he was like barely kind of starting, and he would just come and assist Tommy like as a second engineer. He'd run a 2-track. Bill Schnee went on to be a major engineer, producer, producing, working with Steely Dan, and we're doing engineering for Richard Perry. And, he worked just about with everybody, the top stars. Just go online and look up Bill Schnee, Schnee. And we remember him just hanging out. And you remember him sleeping on the piano one night?
Yeah. We came into the studio and he was asleep on the piano. I guess he was in between getting a place to stay there in Hollywood.
Well, I on YouTube, I ran into a documentary about Bill Schnee, And just for the hell of it, I went on Google and I found his website. So I wrote to him and I said, hey, I remember you from way back, Tommy Coe, Mark Studios. And I reminded him, and he wrote back and he said, oh, yeah, right. Yeah, that was cool. And he had seen my website. And so we just hooked up for that minute. But it was kind of fun that he did get back to me on that. And he did remember. And another guy that came in, this is major. This guy got off the bus from the Midwest, Michael Omardian. And, you know, he looked kind of like a nerd the way he was dressed. And he'd come and hang out. And he asked Tommy, hey, can I play on one of these songs? And like an idiot, I told Tommy, oh, no, you know, it's like we're a self-contained band. And Michael Omardian went on to play on the Asia album with Steely Dan. He's the pianist on the song Asia. He wound up producing Christopher Cross's big hits. Became a major figure in Hollywood, and I turned him down. You know, another one of my brilliant moves, my great career moves. So what happened was Tommy, once we finished the album, Tommy went around to record companies trying to get us a record deal and could not get anything going. And part of the reason was that he was not a businessman. He was not a salesman. He was an artist. He was a totally different kind of guy. And so he couldn't get anything going, you know. And so that's kind of when I thought, you know, we hit a brick wall here, you know. And so that's when I left. And we'll get into that in a second. But I wanted to say a story about American Studios before that, when we were talking about recording with Stan Silver and Tommy Coe. His wife at the time was a school teacher, and she'd come in and sit around and correct papers and stuff. And a couple of years later, she became a major country star, Donna Fargo.
Right.
Happiest girl in the USA and funny face, and she became a big star. So also during this period, when we were recording with Tommy Coe, we were still doing stuff with my dad, and we did a couple of really great sessions with my dad around that period of '68. We did his new version of his parody Pancho Claus. He had originally done it in like 1956 or something. And he decided to do a new version, and he had us play on it. And on his original version, he says, you know, his sister was out in the hall listening to Elvis playing rock and roll. On this one, he says she was out in the hall listening to the Beatles playing rock and roll. And we did a little bit of Sgt. Pepper. We're Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And then he went, and all of a sudden, all through La Casa, you know, and he went on. But we did that record. And we did a song called El Tex-Mex. And by now we're even better at recording because of the Tommy Coe experience. And my dad's producer, Manuel Acuna, liked us. And so he got us this other gig too with this Mexican group. But what do you remember about those Lalo sessions? Anything?
Just that, you know, your dad was always very professional, and you know, he could do everything in like one take. That's how good he was, you know. And so, you know, just watching him work, I mean, you wanted to do the same thing, you know. Why should we do it? You know, we could do it on one take like your dad did, you know. And so it built a lot of confidence in us. And so, you know, just having fun playing, and then having somebody like your dad dig it and keep wanting to use us. It was just, I mean, that was great.
Yeah. Well, we did another song too with him at that time. It was called The Burrito. And it was really funny. I wish I could remember the lyrics, but he's saying, come mi chiquita, say CC, come to the taco stand with me.
Yeah.
And then we'll see just how good a burrito can be. I'll bite on one end, you bite on the other. We'll meet in the middle, and we'll kiss and kiss until we smother. And when we're done, we'll order another. Come,
Yeah.
chiquita, say si, si. Come to the taco stand with me. But we backed him up on that one.
Right.
So, yeah. So getting back to Tommy Coe. So once Tommy couldn't get us a deal, I felt like, oh my God, we put our hearts and souls into this album. We'd been through the MCA thing. We'd been playing together from 63 to 70. This was already 1970. And so I told Tommy, I said, look at Tommy, why don't you produce me as a solo artist and produce those guys, Ernie and Richard, as a separate band, And he refused, because he wanted us together. And I said, Tommy, I just got to do something else now. It's just time to try something else. And you guys added, who did you add first to your band?
Well, what happened was, in between us, after the 1984 record was going no place, I started to play with John.
Valenzuela.
John and Ron Schaefer, and they were doing gigs with Don Podler.
And was Richard playing with you guys?
Well, not yet, but anyway, we that's how I knew that about John playing guitar,
because we knew him as a keyboard player.
Because when we used John Valenzuela back when we were the Men from S.O.U.N.D, right?
Yeah.
He was a keyboard player. He was playing Farfisa at the time. So then I know John as a guitar player, and I started playing with him and Rick, and I mean him and Ron, and then something happened, and Ron couldn't make a gig because he was the bass player, and then John says, well, you think Richard wants to do it? So then we started. That's how the three of us started playing. It was through a Don Podler gig.
And so you guys, started playing gigs and fraternity parties. And I remember going to one sometime in 1970. I think it was at USC outdoors. And I was blown away by John because, again, like you said, we knew him as a Farfisa player. I didn't even know he played guitar. And he was playing not only great, but he had a very cool style. I loved his style, very bluesy and tasty. And he sang well, he sang the same way. And I was totally blown away. And I thought, wow, that's really cool, man. So you had John, and then you wound up adding Steve Verdugo next.
No, first we from Tommy Coe, because we were, me and Richard and John, we did work with Tommy a little bit. We made a little demo tape. It wasn't even a record or anything. But then he introduced us to Steve Stewart, who had just come in from Alabama, and he was one of the writers from Smoke from a Distant Fire. So anyway, we met him, and then we just invited him to come over to our house in Echo Park, and we were playing together, and then we started a band, and he was in our band, and we got really good. We got to do some showcases at the Ice House, and we played at the Beach House with we opened up for the Flame Burrito Brothers. And we did our first set, and it was just, we were cooking. And the Flame Burrito Brothers came out, and they did a good set, and then we were going to do our second set, and then they didn't want us to do the second set because we actually sounded better than they did that certain night. They were having problems. It seemed like one of the members was intoxicated, arguing with everybody. But anyway, yeah, we worked with Steve for a while, and then we ended up working with Steve Verdugo.
So then it was you, Richard, John, and Steve.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you started playing around, and you guys got real tight.
We got real tight, and we did some showcases at the Ice House too. And I guess one of the premier gigs that we did as that group was we played at the Topanga Corral. And it just so happened that that night, the cast from Hair that was at the Aquarius Theater was there, and they just loved us. And it was just like, it was a night to remember. It was just one of those nights that everything just, you know, we blew the roof off that place. It was really good.
And just to remind the audience, Steve Verdugo had been in the Men from Sound back in '68.
Right.
Now this is a couple of years later, and rejoins you and Richard and John in this band. And what were you calling yourselves at that time?
I think at the time we were calling ourselves Gold Seal.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we got a gig in Pasadena at this one beer club right on Colorado, next to the college, and it was called the Clinic. It was a funny place. It was one of those places they just threw sawdust on the ground. The seating inside was like school benches, you know, from the lunch area. But anyway, we played there with Steve, and then I don't know when you came to see us. Did you come to see us during that?
Well, I came to see you guys and was blown away how tight you were and how good you were. But so that incident, me seeing you again, made us get back together again at that point. But now I got to say what I was doing during the breakup. So
right.
You just told your story of what you were doing after we split up. What I did was I somehow met Art Brambilla. I think I met him through Anthony Beret from the Emeralds. And Art heard my stuff, and he started trying to get me a record deal. And he, unlike Tommy, was a really good businessman and a really good, you know, talker, you know, and just, you know, he makes things happen. And he got interest in me by Lou Adler, who was a major producer. He had already produced the Mamas and the Papas, and had his own label and everything. And the other people that were interested is Warner Brothers and Ted Templeman, major producer, later worked with the Doobie Brothers and everybody else. So I actually had my choice. We had to choose who we would go with, and we chose Lou Adler because Lou Adler had grown up in Boyle Heights, and we thought, you know, he might have a more understanding about Chicanos and stuff and where we came from. And so I wound up signing with Lou Adler, and I wound up doing a single with two of the songs we had recorded with Tommy Coe, Lila Love Me Tonight and Dare I Touch You, Mary Lou. And oh my God, on bass and drums, I had Joe Osborne and Hal Blaine, members of the so-called Wrecking Crew that were playing on everything from the Byrds' Mr. Tambourine Man to Frank Sinatra's Strangers in the Night to Up, Up and Away by the Fifth Dimension. They were on everybody's sessions. They were two of the top guys. And so I had them on bass and drums, and I played guitar. We laid down the basic tracks. They learned the song in 5 minutes, did a quick chart, nailed the songs in one take. And then it was the biggest time thing I was ever involved with. I mean, he brought in, Lou Adler brought in a 20-piece string section. He brought in female background singers, Darlene Love, who had been in the Crystals with Phil Spector, and Mary Clayton, who famously sang Just a Shot Away with the Rolling Stones. and these great female background singers. And I mean, it was a top notch, the best of the best musicians and singers, and recorded at A&M Studios because his label was O.D. Records, O-D-E, and he was distributed by A&M. So we recorded at A&M Studios. So that was a hell of an experience. But one little aside that I wanted to say was that when I was at Garfield, I was playing at a senior show that we had, the senior play or whatever. And I was in the orchestra pit on guitar, and Roy Marcus of the Midnighters was with me in there. And I whispered something to him during a rehearsal, and the teacher, said, "What did you say?" I said, "Nothing." "What did you say?" And he came over and he grabbed my hand and he dragged me upstairs to the principal's office, vice principal's office. And I don't know if I got swatted. I don't remember, but I got in some kind of trouble. So his name was Mr. Henderson, right? So this was 1967. Fast forward to 1971 at the Lou Adler session. He was in the string section, playing my song with my name on it. So I looked at him. I didn't say anything to him, but it was quite a kind of a victory, But so anyway, that was a big thing for me to be signed by somebody of that magnitude. And, he went through the whole thing. I mean, if he didn't like it, he could have stopped and not put all the money into it. But,
right.
He went to the whole thing of putting it out. His name was on it. Somehow didn't get any promotion. But it's another one that sounds like a hit if you listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a great experience. And so I did that. And then that ended because I got lost in the shuffle. Tapestry had just come out with Carole King on that label with Lou Adler producing. And that was such a big hit, selling multiple platinum, millions of records, that he didn't have time for me or other artists. So I just kind of got lost in the shuffle there. So Art and I moved on, and he had gotten permission to record a bunch of East L.A. bands from Capitol Records because he was working in the merchandising department of Capitol Records. He convinced them to, hey, quit flying all over the country. Go 20 minutes down the freeway. There's a lot of East L.A. bands that are great. So they gave him a budget and a studio to record in, independent studios in Studio City. And I had the opportunity to go in and record a couple of songs that Capitol could consider. Art also brought in Tierra. Tierra had just formed, the Salas Brothers. He brought in Yaki, which our old friend George Ochoa was one of the lead singers with Eddie Serrano, the other lead singer, who had been in the Enchantments. He brought in the Emeralds. He brought in Mickey and the Invaders, or I didn't even realize till I just interviewed Mickey that they came too. So I needed a band, and I had seen you guys at the clinic. And you guys were great. And I mean, you guys had come from the time we broke up to that, whatever it was, year later, the experience that you got playing with Steve Stewart and then playing with John and Steve Verdugo, you guys, so, it was good for both of us. I wound up getting a major deal, but you guys wound up creating a great band and getting way better. And I was kind of blown away. You guys blew my mind. And so I asked you, I said, hey, would you guys be willing to back me up on these sessions? And you did. And so we went in and recorded my song Rock and Roll Queen. And Steve Verdugo was on electric piano, played great. John was on slide guitar, played great. The band, you guys just nailed it. We did it live all together in the studio. I was on acoustic rhythm, and you sang harmony with me, and we kicked ass on that. And then we did the flip side, another song of mine called Lonely, which was a very Neil Youngish kind of thing. And everybody played great again. But on that, Steve didn't play, but Anthony Beret of the Emeralds, I'd invited him to come too. He played Hammond organ on that and played beautifully on that. And after all the bands recorded, Capitol selected Rock and Roll Queen is what they wanted to put out. So I was a solo artist. So I was a solo artist on Capitol. Rock and Roll Queen and Lonely was released in 1972. Anyway, that's how we got back together. And then we started doing gigs on the side together with Yumi and John and Richard. And we started calling ourselves the Mud Brothers and playing a lot of gigs. And then we continued to record. We did then, a few months later, we did another single, which was I'm Brown, song that I wrote. And flip side was Living Off the Land. And Anthony played Hammond organ on both of those. And talk about the I'm Brown session. I mean, number one, the drum pattern that you came up with was incredible. I'll talk about that. And I did give you a suggestion for the chorus. So go ahead.
Yeah, it was when me and Richard and John were playing together, we just found a groove. You know, we could play just about anything and improvise and start and end together, you know. And when we started learning your songs, you gave us the main idea of what you wanted, how you wanted the feel to be, and we were able to create things that you know, you just let us go, and we were able to do justice to your songs.
Are you kidding me? But on I'm Brown, the one suggestion I told you was on the chorus, play it like a doo-wop song, like you know, when
Right.
into the chorus, don't you know I'm brown, dum, 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 dum. And then it went into that other groove in the verses. But that made a big difference. And I was playing the piano. I later overdubbed the piano, doing that ding, 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 ding,
Right.
so it gave that other groove to the chorus. And then John Valenzuela and I did the twin lead guitar parts. And that was an experience because I was playing my Les Paul Custom. He was playing, I think, an SG. And we did that solo, 2 solos, you know, him taking turns and then playing together. And it was one take, you know, unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's an incredible thing, you know. That whole song jumped on tape. You know, I think the band did the track in one take. I did the piano part and the piano solo in one take. John and I did the solos in one take. And then I later did the vocal. But, you know, that song many years later wound up in the Grammy Museum a couple of times in an exhibit called Songs of Conscience, Sounds of Freedom.
Right.
But yeah. And we also had a wonderful engineer there named B.B. Cunningham that we loved. He was like another Tommy Coe. He was another Southerner. He was kind of a hippie, you know, long hair, beard, hat, cool as a cucumber. And he engineered I'm Brown, this guy from Memphis. And we loved him, right? Talk about BB.
Yeah, BB he just set the mood for us to be ourselves. And it was just, you know, you didn't even realize he was there sometimes.
Totally comfortable.
We were playing, and we had rehearsed your songs at our apartment, you know. And so me and Richard, we used to have bass and drum rehearsal for your songs. So we'd start off the song and just do the whole song, just drum and bass. And so we put a lot of time and effort into those songs, and it shows in the recordings. Yeah, the recordings they're right on.
And you also had the benefit of those the time with Tommy Coe, you know, locking in, so that education and then playing with the other guys afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it all, you know, there's no way around getting paying dues to get to where you're at. You can't, you know, it all of it moves forward, you know. And it was an experience with Tommy to learn how to like you said, get into the pocket. And then by the time me and Richard and John developed our sound, and it just worked great with your songs, you know.
And were you guys already living in that house on the side of the hill in Echo Park?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, we'll say a little bit about that. That was another blessing. It's just like we had Rick Rosas's basement. We had that house to rehearse in. It was in Echo Park. It was on the side of a hill overlooking the Golden State Freeway, the 5. in Echo Park. And you had to go down, how many stairs would you say to get down to the house?
And I can't, it was, I
50?
know over 50. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a
And so
lot.
we had to carry equipment down there and everything. But the beauty of it was because it was on the side of the hill, we could make noise. We could, play at night. We could, smoke pot, whatever. It was like just a free thing. And it was great that we would be able to rehearse there. And that went on through our the A&M thing when we were with Tango. That was our clubhouse. That was our rehearsal place. And
Right.
right.
We did our rehearsals there before we played the Roxy. And
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like you said, we could have used more musicians at the Roxy. We could have invited Anthony to play organ.
Didn't even think of it because he wasn't in the band at the time. But that's the next chapter. We don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. It's the next chapter. After we did the first two singles, we were allowed to go in and cut some more of my stuff. So we recorded another 6 songs or so. And it was fun. We do 2 at a time. And it was just great, man. And John was fantastic. Everything he came up with fit perfectly. And the grooves, you and Richard were right on the money. And it was just a very, very tight band.
Yeah. Plus the guest artists on that.
Oh, thank you.
We had the Elijah Horn section.
Yeah, on 2 songs, on Nobody's Satisfied and Hang On. They came in, created the parts, nailed them, perfect. We had Steve Salas came in and sang harmony with you and me.
Steve Salas, yes.
On Nobody's Satisfied. And on the 2 country songs, which were Don't Rain on My Parade and Wild Night at the Old Rest Home, I asked Art to get us Sneaky Pete Kleino of the Flying Burrito Brothers.
Right.
He was one of the greatest steel guitar players in the world. He played on everybody's albums. And so I asked Art, can you get us Sneaky Pete? And somehow Art came up with him and hired him, and he showed up and he played magnificently on those 2 songs.
Yes.
And I was right there next to him, and he would listen to me when he'd do something, go, yeah, let's do more of that. And, he came up with the parts, but I did say a few things, and he was open to doing it like I liked it. And those solos are golden, right? So that was a thrill to have Sneaky Pete.
Yeah, I was wondering, since I heard them recently, I was wondering if you had told him anything about his lead parts, because they fit so perfect.
Oh God.
Yeah,
so we did the 6 songs, and we got time at the Capitol Tower, which was thrilling to be in the Capitol Tower recording. And we did another country rock song of mine called Brown Hair Growing. And there, surprisingly, the engineer didn't seem to know how to record a rock band. I think he might have been a country engineer. But remember what he did with your drums? You couldn't believe it?
Yeah, we had, as you could tell by this story, we had been in studios for a long time, and knowing how the instruments should be mic'd, so when the guy finished, I looked at my drums and I'm like, I had one overhead mic and nothing separate on the snare drum and nothing, I think I had one on the bass drum, but then my toms weren't, I guess he expected to get the toms with the overhead. So, we were just like, well, what's going on? It's that's not what should be going on. So anyway, he said, okay. And he fixed it, but during that period of time, we had a break, and I ended up going to the lounge, and I was there by myself, and I happened to go in, and then who walks in is one of my favorite all-time drummers at the time, Jim Gordon. Jim Gordon comes in, and I'm in awe of him, and so he sits down, and I started some small talk with him, and he was laughing because he says, man, this guy, he says, I'm making triple scale today. And he says, it's nothing. He says, this guy's playing acoustic guitar. And he says, it doesn't, I think it sounds horrible, but he's happy with it. So anyway, I just told him, I gushed all over him all, I love all your playing and, so after whatever I had told him, he just says, well, he says, I guess he says, you're here like I am. So we're both recording. So he says, you must be good. So I went, when I went back into the recording studio, I just, I don't know if my feet were even touching the ground. And then I laid down a great drum track.
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
And of course, Jim Gordon played with Derek and the Dominoes with Eric Clapton. And,
right.
He just was one of the top studio musicians of the era.
Leon Russell.
Yeah. So anyway, so we recorded that song, and then because things went kind of south with me and Art, my lawyer wound up getting us a deal with A&M Records, and so A&M bought the masters from Capitol, all the things that we had done, including I'm Brown and Rock and Roll Queen, and we went over there, and so our A&M album wound up being 4 new songs we recorded at A&M, and we picked the best of the other songs and created that album. And we were hooked up with, my lawyer hooked us up with Joe Wisser as a producer. And Joe Wisser, had produced The Turtles, Happy Together, Gordon Lightfoot's If You Could Read My Mind. He had done the first couple of Earth, Wind and Fire albums. He just had an incredible resume. I don't know if he had already done Silk Degrees, but he was producer of Buzzcocks, Silk Degrees. Anyway, he became a producer, very nice guy, very mellow, the kind of guy we like. And we went in and recorded 4 more of my songs at Clover Studios, which happened to be the same building as Mark Studios, where we recorded with Tommy Cole.
Right.
Those few years before, 5 years before. And the vibe was different. You weren't as comfortable there. It wasn't like a B.B. King vibe or a Tommy Cole vibe. And I remember you were a little out of sorts.
Yeah, I don't know. The songs are okay, but they don't have that feel from the independent studio tracks. And I don't know why, but I feel like the songs rushed, like I rushed the songs,
Well, I think, in my opinion, you were right on, he's an artist. You nailed that.
Yeah.
You freaking, that was tight. Walk On Down, I think you sped up the ending a little bit. Alessandro, I think you nailed it. And Greenback Blues, I think that sped up at the end. But that was all. I just noticed a little speed up on those 2 songs.
Yeah. But I remember, when it first came out, I didn't even want to hear those songs.
Whoa. But don't blame the songs. It was the recording.
Yeah. I was like, oh man, my drum parts, they got away from me. But, years later, I've been listening to some of these documentary on these rock bands. And they're saying that, if the speeding up works with the song, then it's fine, So that's what I have to think.
Well, very few, even Beatle records, very few records are like the same all the way through. They're not. They get a little faster, they get a little slower. It's a natural thing. Unless you have quantizing and you're doing digital, then it's perfect, but then it sounds mechanical.
Yeah.
Human beings do kind of, rise and fall. And bands do that. It's cool, it's part of the life of the song. But what about when you hear them now? Does it bother you now? I mean, you probably say,
oh no, I love everything now. I'm amazed. Yes, I'm amazed that the songs came out the way they did. I mean, they couldn't have been any better, no matter who else would have played them, and we were able to get together with you the second time and really do a great album. and you sang your ass off too.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
After we did the album, my lawyer hooked me up with a manager to check us out, and because we needed a manager. And he got me an appointment with this guy named Roy Silver. There was Stan Silver. This is Roy Silver. And he had, I think he had something to do with Bob Dylan at one point. He had his own record label, Tetragrammaton or something. I think he had something to do with a couple of artists, I forget. But he was a manager of Bill Cosby, you know. But I don't know how that tied into us. But so I went to see him. He had an office on Sunset, not too far from the Roxy Theater. And this was funny. I give him the album. He puts on one song. Here's about 20 seconds, picks it up. Another song here. There's 20 seconds. Okay, that sounds pretty good. He goes, I'll get you in the Roxy. Oh, what the hell, man? And so he booked us into the Roxy that quick, you know, he probably made a phone call. And the Roxy was brand new. It had opened in late 73. And Neil Young, I think, was the first artist to play there. And we loved Neil Young. We loved Buffalo Springfield. And so this was like January or February of 74. We were one of the first bands to play there.
Yes.
Fortunately, like so many things that went wrong with our stuff, we're paired with the wrong band. You know, we should have opened for Jackson Browne or, you know, somebody like that. But no, we opened for Flash Cadillac and the Continental Kids, who were like a Sha Na Na band. Yes. You know, 50s retro with the cigarettes in the sleeve and short hair. So the crowd that came was like a Flash Cadillac crowd, and we were these long-haired Chicano hippies, man. We're lucky we survived it, but we actually won them over. But it would have been so much better if it had been, like I was saying, a Jackson Browne crowd or a Buffalo Springfield crowd. But we got through it, and we played Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I believe, and that was really exciting to play there. We got a lot of it on video, no sound, but somebody put a little tape recorder up in the dressing room by the speaker in the dressing room, so we do have a tape of us playing one of the sets, but you can barely hear the vocal, but you can hear the music pretty well.
Right.
Was that you that taped it?
Yeah, I think my uncle came to watch us, and he had a little cassette player with him, and he says, "Here, I brought this for you."
Oh, wow.
And so he lent me the cassette player, and I was able to record it.
Synchronicity again.
Just like that. Yeah. And so, you know, we get to hear our sets and but it's just coming through the playback that's in the dressing room. Just
at least you can hear the songs, you can hear how we sounded, you can hear the crowd.
Yes.
And you know, we got comfortable after, you know, as it went on the weekend, we got comfortable.
Yeah.
I remember one time I had a problem with a chord, and John just went on the mic and started riffing and saying stuff, you know. Pretty comfortable.
And he denies that. You know,
we have it on tape.
Yeah, well, he's like, is that me?
No, that's him. No, but everybody played great, man. It was cool. So then, but then anyway, so then we got screwed. And I wouldn't say we got screwed, but what happened is this guy Roy Silver was supposed to be our manager. He would have gotten us a good booking agent, and we could have gone on tour maybe. But apparently, what I heard was he asked for a certain exorbitant amount of money. He wanted salary or whatever to manage us, and A&M didn't want to do it. So that fell through. So that was one of our many problems is when our album came out, we didn't have a manager. We didn't have anybody to sort of try to get us going. And so that hurt us tremendously, but we didn't know any different. If we had known, we would have immediately tried to get another manager.
Right.
So that was a thing. And the other things that hurt us was when I got signed to A&M, when we went over from Capitol, I was a solo artist. This album was supposed to be my album, and you guys are going to be the backup band like on the Capitol stuff. That's what it was. But somebody, I'm not sure if it was somebody at the label or my lawyer or the producer, somebody came down and said, no. We liked the idea of the concept of a band. They liked the four of us, the way we looked together. It had a vibe. Rather than just be a Mark Guerrero album, it should be a group album, even though I wrote and sang all the songs. But so did Creedence Clearwater, right? John Fogerty wrote all the songs, or Ray Davies with the Kinks. It was like more like that model. So suddenly I lost my solo thing, and now it's a band. And I go, okay, well, all right, that's what you guys think. Fine. Now it's a band. So now I said, well, think of a name. And I go, well, we've been working gigs as the Mudd Brothers, M-U-D-D, and we love that name. And we thought it fit us because it's funky, sounds bluesy. Mud is brown. We were brown. You know, it was a great name. We loved it. The Mudd Brothers. I think it would have been much better. But no, they said, no, you guys are Latino. So you come up with something, you know, because then Malo was out, Santana was out, El Chicano. And they said they wanted a name like that. They wanted us to be Los Somethings, you know. And at the time, I didn't want to because our music didn't reflect that. Our music was rock and country rock. You know, our idols were Buffalo Springfield, Poco, the band, you know, the Byrds, you know, the Beatles, Dylan. That's what we were about, you know. And so I didn't want to do that, but so all these compromises we made. So I said, oh, well, let me think about it. And Last Tango in Paris was out with Marlon Brando, and he was really hot at the time. The Godfather had happened. And so I thought, well, tango, that's Latin, and that doesn't sound too radical, you know. And in terms of divorce from what the music was like, even though I'm Brown was on there and Alessandro had a Spanish chorus, our music really reflected a different vibe, like I said. And so I came up with the name Tango. I wasn't happy about it at all, but it was like a compromise. And, you know, if it had been now, I would have refused and I would have been a lot more insistent on things. But at that age, you're afraid you're going to blow the deal. And so that was one compromise. That was a big mistake, naming the group Tango. And then we went for a photo session and with A&M's photographer. And he goes, I've got an idea. Let's take a picture with you and your moms and dads. And I'm going, what? I've never heard of a rock and roll band doing that, you know? And he goes, well, then what about with your cars? And I go, that doesn't make sense either. So again, compromising, I said, what about at our houses? Okay. So he went to each of our, where we were living at the time, and took pictures of us. You were living in Santa Monica at that point.
Yeah, in Venice.
And you took a picture next to your bicycle. And Richard was still living at the Echo Park house on the hill.
Right.
And he took a picture in front of some cactus. It looked very cool. And then John was living in, I think, was it Highland Park?
Highland Park, yeah.
Yeah. And he took a picture, really cool, in the doorway. And it had this really cool wooden archway thing over him. And then I was living in Echo Park on Alessandro Street, and took a picture on top of the garage. And that was on the back of the cover. So the problem was, when our album came out, if people saw it in a record store, they'd see this album that just said the word tango on the front. Now, most people would think, well, this must be an Argentinian tango music album.
Yeah.
You know, they wouldn't even know it was rock.
No.
With that wrong name and that cover with no picture of us on it. So that was, I think that was a disaster. So that, plus the fact of no manager, you know, we didn't get to tour. We just played a gig, UC San Diego and some high school, Verdugo Hills High School, and what else did we do? We played the rock.
We played at UCLA.
UCLA, and that was a disaster too, because the comedian screwed us over.
Yes,
Frank
he went over his time.
Yeah, he went over his time, so that by the time we went on, most of the kids had to go back to class.
Yes.
So we lost 90% of the audience. You know, they were still learning lessons at that point. But anyway, so then we had the opportunity to do another single. And we did, I had written a song called Holy Moses. It was very kind of CCR style. And another song called Rock and Roll Circus. We went into A&M Studios, and man, by then we were really good recording artists. And we did a really good job on those two songs. The only problem there was we were assigned as producer Henry Louis, a major producer who had just finished producing Joni Mitchell's album, the one she did with the LA Express, Tom Scott and Larry Carlton and the best musicians in the world, you know, and Joni Mitchell, arguably one of the greatest songwriter of the period. And so he had just finished that. So coming to us was like, oh my God, this is like, you know, this is boring. You know, this doesn't, of course, he wasn't going to match that. He would have felt the same way if it had been CCR or Neil Young, probably. But he had this whole superior attitude. And he just said, oh, well, you know, I don't know, it's kind of boring. And so, oh, great, thank you. But he did record the basic tracks and it sounded really good. So I just said, hey, man, this isn't going to work out. So they wound up letting me be the producer and take over. So I went in and finished up the record and it sounded really great. Once again, I don't think I got any promotion. So after all of our experiences recording through those years between 69 and 74 and never getting any promotion, I was kind of fed up and I go, man. And I just decided to go back to school, and I went back to school in Chicano studies, and that made a whole other trajectory. But that was sort of the end of Tango, and that was the end of A&M. Although, you know, you, me, and John and Richard would occasionally play together and do things or get together. And in '83, Richard had a studio in Laurel Canyon called Wonderground.
Right.
This big abandoned World War II bunker place, incredible. And we went and recorded 2 of my songs, Song and Dance Man in Hollywood. And it was fun. We got together, the 4 of us, and still knew how to record and played great. And we have those. Although it was more of a Tascam 8-track situation rather than a, you know, a 2-inch tape thing, but it's still
right.
And that's the tale of Tango, and I'm sticking to it.
Yes, and those last songs that we did with as us as Tango, you know, those were fun songs, even though we had been away from recording.
Oh yeah, it came out really nice. And ironically, the song Hollywood is all about how cutthroat Hollywood is. And it says, Hollywood, blood and money flow. It's a place where they all go who want to be a star. Hollywood, land of busted dreams, you know, land of something like that. And then it says, and rainbows in a jar. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing, a land of fear and loathing, where the law of the jungle still applies. Lord, it makes so many bitter when every day they litter the streets with entertainers, something and dog trainers and writers and painters on the rise. So it was a very anti-Hollywood, you know, you dirty industry, you know, but it's a good song. It's a really good song. Right. And, but again, we got redemption because I'm Brown wound up in the Grammy Museum twice. And just this last April, I got to sing I'm Brown at the Grammy Museum with John Valenzuela playing guitar with me.
Right.
And you couldn't come. You were in Eureka. You'd moved up there and get down there. And it was a wonderful event that I helped organize. And we had Lil Willie G perform and Jerry Gonzalez. And Art Brambilla came in. Art and I made up after that, our business disagreements. And we were on a panel. And we got to talk about our experiences in the music business. So we got to air our grievances, some of the racism that we encountered. As a matter of fact, Jerry told a story, Jerry Gonzalez, female Jerry. She said when she was with her major record label, they told her, you don't sound black enough, you don't sound white enough, you know. So, about her. Capitol wanted me to change my name to something Anglo-sounding. Art told that story. So to be able to tell our story, all of us, and we weren't whining or complaining. We were just telling it like it is what happened. Art got to say his piece. Willie G sang a couple of his great songs that were, you know, not midnighter songs, but that were more, you know, social, political type things that would fit into this event. This event had to do with songs of conscience and freedom. And so we got to, and we did this little finale performance where Willie G did 2 songs. I did I'm Brown. And then I backed up Jerry on my song Mijita. And then Trio Los Dados backed up Jerry. And then they backed me up on one of my dad's songs, El Chicano, a song called Chicano but Chicano Pride. And Jerry sang Art Brambilla's song Mañana Is Now, which he had recorded in 76. And then we had a La Bamba finale, standing ovation. It was a tremendous thing. It was a real highlight. I still got to get the video of the finale is on YouTube if you look it up. But I'd like to get my hands on the I'm Brown video, but I don't have it yet. So we got a little redemption there, and you know, we've been written up in some things, and you know.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing too, of all the publications that are Mark and the Escorts are in too. We didn't mention that.
Oh yeah, and Tango in the Land of a Thousand Dances book.
Right.
Waldman, David Reyes, Tango's mentioned a lot in there, and I'm Brown's mentioned, and yeah, we've gotten some attention, but I'm still hoping I'm Brown gets more attention, because I think it should have some more attention. And it's still around. A lot of people love it. A lot of young people love it that have heard it, and you know, I still perform it whenever I do my own concerts. It lives on. You know. So, anything else you'd like to add to this saga, man? This is huge. It's going to be the longest show I've done.
But... Well, after the Tango thing, then I kept playing. I was able to go on the road and play with some lounge bands, and they were based out of Denver. One of the bands was based out of Denver, and so I traveled all over the Midwest, and then one of the bands that I joined in, the leader of the band was a bass player from the Pop Art Experimental Band.
Oh, that we saw at the Teenage Fair back in the...
Yes, and he was fun to play with. He was a good musician.
Hey, another thing that should be mentioned was, and I think it might have been after that, but somewhere around 75, 76, is that when you were playing with Cannibal?
Oh yeah, that in between the first band that I went on the road with, I was just I was doing a carpenter. I started back being a carpenter with my dad, and Richard got a hold of me and he says, you know, our drummer, we got rid of our drummer, or the drummer got arrested or something, I don't know. And he was playing with Cannibal, from Cannibal and the Headhunters. They had a band called Shaky Bone, and it was John was playing guitar.
Venezuela.
John Valenzuela was playing guitar. Richard was playing bass. Jimmy Seville was the keyboard player. Tony Duran was the guitar player.
Great musician.
And Cannibal was a lead singer with Eddie Serrano was his background singer. And then we had a female vocalist, Gloria Goldstein. And that's the best lounge band I ever played in. That band, at a drop of a hat, shifting into a jam, man, those guys were just like, stand back.
And you have tapes of that too.
Yeah.
You guys were playing at the Mardi Gras, right? In downtown LA?
Right, yeah. And it was funny because they were going to finish that gig out and then go to Kabuki's. And but that was a 4-night gig instead of just the weekend gig.
So you couldn't do it.
And I turned Cannibal down, and it's funny because he came over and he had heard that, you know, I wasn't going to do it, and the first thing he says, "What happened, Ernie? Can't you cut the mustard?" So he gave me a swift kick. Yeah, this is what I remember, and it was so much fun to play with them because all of those musicians were just top-notch musicians, you know. And it was just like, wow, this is great, you know. And so I, at the time, I was still recording because all this time that from our Mark and the Escorts all the way till then, I was recording. I always had some kind of recording equipment, and I recorded a live tape of us playing at the Mardi Gras. And I sent it to my friend Bob, who was on the road with his band. And because of that tape, I ended up getting a job with that band he was in, and I went back on the road.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a blessing again. Your dad took tons of pictures of us, you know, Mark
Mhm.
Escorts, Men from Sound. And you, because you had a Roberts tape recorder, you taped us all throughout the years, so many things.
Right.
And ironically, even years after we weren't playing together, some of my concerts and shows over the years, you would come with your video recorder and videotape me. Or
Right.
so a lot of my videos I have today are thanks to you coming and videotaping. So we're very well documented because of you and your dad. And I've been lucky that way. A lot of people have come at the right time and happened to bring a video recorder, and eventually I
Yes.
got my own. And now I
Yeah.
got Tony Ray as this great videographer that
Right.
watches a lot of what I do.
Nice man.
Yeah, jamming classics. So I guess that's it, Ernie. What do you think, man? This was a marathon.
Yeah, you know, the whole experience back when we were starting out, and that whole being lucky enough to progress as much as we did, and we were able to play with the big boys all the time. You know, all of these dances we played at, we were always, you know, the star bands were always older than us, and we were, you know, and we had a following. We, you know.
Oh yeah, definitely. And as, you know, as we got older, it kept going. But yeah, in the beginning, when we were a young band, I remember one time we played at the Big Union with the Midnighters and all these people, and it said, you know, they used to call us the world's littlest big band,
Yeah.
or you know, something like that.
Yeah. So it was just a great experience. And you know, our good friend Richard Rosas went on to become the bass player for our heroes, you know.
Well, I wouldn't call Joe Walsh a hero, but I like him, but I won't call him a
But
hero, but he's great.
I
And
meant
Neil
when
Young,
yeah, Neil Young and the Buffalo Springfield when they did
reunion.
the reunion. Yes. Yeah. So uh and and one of the things about that is that I was instrumental in him being able to meet Dan Fogelberg and Joe Walsh, and from Joe Walsh, Neil Young, is because of my friend Danny Murakami.
That's how the
Being,
door opened for Richard at first.
yeah,
Your friend Danny Murakami, who was
yeah,
Fogelberg's roadie.
right. He was his guitar tech.
So Ernie, thank you for doing this marathon. Man, it was very hard trying to cover all those groups over, you know, 10 plus years, but I think we did it. We'll do some editing, but my God, I almost have a headache trying to remember all this stuff and try to make sense of all this stuff. But I think we managed to do a pretty good job.
Yes, I think we went over just about everything. I'm sure we missed stuff, but you know,
The major stuff.
yeah, the thing was is that we just had a journey that you know, for a while there I didn't even know if I was going to play with you again, you know. After the Tommy Coe thing, I had no idea we were going to end up collaborating again, and you know, uh we haven't stopped since then. You know, we're still you're my oldest friend.
Yeah, we've known each other a long, long time, man. Almost kind of like brothers in a way, especially
Yeah,
because like your parents were like, you know, almost second parents. I go over there and
the same way with your mom and your dad.
so, okay, man. Well, thanks again. And, you know, I don't know what else to say with you. I'm
Like
drained.
Richard would say, let's go have some taquitos.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good, in fact, I think I'll go have some right now. So thanks, man. A beautiful job. And I'll let you know when this is edited, and it might take me a while because this is pretty long, but
Yeah.
I'll try to make some sense of it.
All right.
Okay, man. We'll have a good one, and I'll talk to you later.
Okay, Mark.